My name is Chris Krupka, and it's my pleasure to introduce our first panel of presenters and fellow colleagues at Baird Home. We're all from different generations, and as such, I have had the pleasure of working with all of them in our labor and employment section, some for a very, very long time, and some, well, we're still getting to know each other. But regardless of age or generational background, they are all fantastic attorneys, and I will briefly introduce to you each one. First up is John Burning. Give him a little wave. John joined Baird Home in 1979, and he's been with the firm since then, minus a 5-year stint as executive vice president and general counsel at a technology company client. We were thrilled when he came back to our firm, where he served as the firm's general counsel until very recently. Aside from keeping all of us in line, he has represented clients on a wide range of labor and employment, healthcare, nonprofit, corporate, and technology law matters. As a side note, I'm convinced that the man does not age. Next, we have Sarah McHugh. Sarah describes herself as a lover and not a fighter, so she prefers to counsel clients in an effort to keep them out of litigation. She joined Baird Home in 2014 and regularly provides fair housing compliance training on a number of topics, as well as workplace training on harassment prevention, reasonable accommodations, and other employment-related topics. And last, we have Addison McCauley. Addison is one of our newest associates at Baird Home, so as he just joined us last year. We threw him to the wolves almost immediately, so he helps defend our employers in a wide range of workplace claims under Title VII, the ADA, the ADEA, and the FLSA, in addition to other federal and state employment laws. He's clearly one of our fighters. And moderating the panel today is Heidi Gutach, who joined Baird Home in 1999. She's another one of our experienced fighters, as she spends a significant amount of time defending employment litigation matters. I've seen her in action many, many times, and she is quite impressive. Fun fact about Heidi, she once won Best Carcass in a competition at West Fair in Council Bluffs, Iowa, so anyone going up against her should be very wary. Please give them all a warm welcome.
That was for my show pig, though, the carcass award. So, well, thank you all for having us today. We're excited to kind of share thoughts about generational differences in our workplace and other workplaces and things we see and the benefits and maybe challenges of that. We're fortunate at Baird Home. We have all 5 generations that are generally in the workplace. We have all 5 at Baird Home. We have Judge Caparelli, who will be 95 this fall. He's a former Supreme Court Justice and former Douglas County District Court Judge. Begged him to come today, but he's pretty careful with crowds with COVID. Comes to work every day in his 3-piece suit and wants to be busy and researches and does great work for us. And so we have every generation. And so I know Chris introduced us, but I also wanted to kind of start with the panel and talk about what generation you fall in, and maybe just some how you became a lawyer, and maybe generationally how that looks different for each of us. And so kind of just to start with, so I'm a Gen Xer, the coolest generation. Everything's a sequel from what we did in the 80s, right? There's no original movies. Everything's a sequel. We had the coolest music. Even my kids listen to it. So we know we're the coolest. It's fine. But I went to Creighton and then worked for a federal judge and then came to Baird Home. And like Chris said, just employment litigation. And I think that in a lot of ways, Gen Xers, it's probably true. We work to live, and I think that is true of our generation, and we think nothing will get done unless we're involved in it. And so that is definitely pretty typical of us and me probably as well. So Sarah?
Well, I'm Sarah McHugh. I've been at the firm since about 2014 or so. I'm originally from Western Nebraska, so if anyone else here is from the Panhandle, come see me and we'll chat about it. I fall pretty squarely into the millennial generation, right smack dab in the middle of it. So anytime someone has a stereotype to throw out about millennials, I know Heidi said I'm not a fighter, maybe Chris said that, but I do love to fight about millennial stereotypes. So that's one thing I'm willing to take up arms about. But yeah, I've been at Baird Home for my whole legal career, so I'm happy to be here.
Like I said, I'm Addison McCauley, and I just graduated last year out of law school at Creighton, in the labor and employment litigation department. And I think I'm right on the border of millennial and Gen Z. I think I count myself more as a millennial. I've got two older brothers, so it's one of them's right there, and and so I think that pulls me a little bit further into the millennial side, but I'm not sure.
I'm John Bruning. I'm right smack in the middle of the baby boom generation. You can do the math, figure out how old I'm getting. Grew up in Detroit, went to law school in Michigan, came to Omaha to work for Baird Home. I don't have a great story why I became a lawyer. It seemed like something I could do. I got into law school, much to my parents' amazement. And my parents obviously were from the silent generation, and they always told my brothers and I, we don't care what you do as long as you get your butt out and do something. And I didn't have to do landscaping or work in a Ford factory as I had done before. So law seemed great. And it's been a great career. Been very fortunate.
Great. Well, let's briefly talk about the generations, just in case you don't know where you fall. So the silent generation would be those born before 1945, generally. And so that would be like Judge Caparelli at our office. Anybody else have anybody in the silent generation still in their workplace? Yeah, great. Yeah. So they're kind of known for being very frugal, hard workers, diligent. And I do think that fits Judge Caparelli, because sometimes I'll say, Judge, that's a great looking suit. And he'll be like, well, thank you. It's older than you are. So they are definitely frugal, and like to work hard. Baby boomers like John. How many baby boomers do we have in here? Let's raise our hand. Okay. Yep. And so your generation is typically stereotyped. Also, yours is live to work. Gen X is work to live. That's loyal to employers, competitive, goal-centric, focused, and disciplined, and can be a little bit skeptical, crave independence, and think globally. Then that moved into Gen X. Sorry, you got my lists mixed up. So yeah, baby boomers, live to work, competitive, goal-centric, and disciplined. Gen X, how many we got? Gen X. Yep, not as many as I thought. Okay, so we work to live. We crave independence. We were the latchkey kids, and had more independence. Eager to learn, thrive on flexibility. So millennials, how many millennials do we have? Oh, a lot. Okay, that's pretty representative, they say, of the workforce as well. Fully transparent, share everything. Yep. Do well with detailed instructions, desire to make an impact, love diversity, love technology. Gen Z. So any Gen Zs in here? No. Okay. Close. So age 21, let's see, 96 to, born, after 96 is generally, So you're known for acceptance of others. Tech innate is the first generation to grow up completely with modern technology. I think that does definitely make a difference. Realist and individualistic. So definitely very big differences in the generations, but we see some crossover as well. We love the diversity in age that we have at the firm. I think we really value it. And one of my favorite stories is one more Judge Caparelli story. So one time we took Judge Caparelli out for lunch with some of the summer associates, and somehow, our interns that summer, somehow we got to talking about who was president when you were born. And so I'm like, oh, Nixon. And then the summer associates are like, Bush, they're young and all that's Clinton. And it's real quiet. And Judge Caparelli says, Calvin Coolidge. And I about fell off my chair, because that's just, who would have thought? So anyway, we thought we'd just start off with some various aspects of maybe how age in our generations affect us in the workplace. And one of the big things is, of course, technology. So when John and I started in the law, it was very different. So what did the law practice look like technology-wise when you started?
We had typewriters.
Uh-huh.
No, literally, there was no technology. Fax machines were really not in widespread use in law firms. It was developing. I remember actually my legal secretary when I started, who was considerably older than I was, did not trust fax machines. She proofread everything that came off. There were no mobile phones. There were no laptops. There was no remote connection. So my first 19 years, it was Monday through Saturday every week downtown. So I had to learn the technology from the ground up. Certainly wasn't born, had no innate sense. And my 10-year-old granddaughter reminds me daily.
Yeah, and when I started, of course, we had cell phones, but it was still, there was no ECF filing. So everybody remembers running to the courthouse by 5 to get things filed, and so that has changed, and probably for the worse, because at least you knew you were going to be done at 5, and now we can file at 11:59 p.m., which I never do, right, Chris Kruka? So it definitely has changed. So now for you two, on the flip, oh, go ahead.
Let me just add one
Yeah.
thing. This may shock most of you. There was no Lexis or Westlaw. When I was in law school, there was one computer. You could reserve an hour far in advance, and if you weren't on law review, you really couldn't. So there was no. I mean, research was 100% books until I was well along in my career.
Yeah, they're laughing.
And we knew how to shepherdize,
That's
which I'm sure
right.
is not a thing.
I used the word shepherdize not too long ago, and the associate was like, "What?" And I'm like, "Site check with Westlaw." So yes. So on the flip side, are there any technologies or things that you've seen at the firm that you're like, I don't even know what that was, or what is that used for, or not too much?
So not so much. I think, at least in my experience, getting used to, I think the phones has been like the office desk phone has been like the most like challenging,
Got a cord.
surprisingly challenging piece of technology. Conference calls, figuring that out. So.
Yeah, that's great. I never thought about that.
Yeah.
They used to even hang on walls with cords.
Right? Yeah. And I mean, to do conference calls on the cell phone, all you have to do is click a button.
Yes, that's true.
I'd be really curious too. So I graduated from Nebraska Law in 2014. And when I graduated in our legal research classes, they were still having us use the physical books, the reporters, and learning to shepherdize.
Good.
I don't think I've ever used a book in my legal practice. So I don't know, Addison, if you did. But.
No. No, I think the shepherdize, I've heard that term once now, and it's like it's a click. It's like you can click on a button on Lexis to like shepherdize something.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, and I also technology as far as we had somebody job shadowing, and they were asking me about the LSAT. I was like, oh yeah, they'll give you like a sample test and you can take it. And I'm like, well, that's been almost 30 years ago. Why didn't you ask Addison? And he's like, oh yes, it's online courses, it's reviews, it's practice tests. So that's changed as well, just getting into law school or getting into the law.
Yeah, no, a big difference studying for the LSAT, I found, was the year that I started studying. Khan Academy for the first time offered free LSAT prep, and so I used that, and I thought it was great. And I think it's an incredible step forward for taking away a barrier.
Right. One other technology thing we had. Anybody still use the interoffice envelopes where you cross out the name and write another name below? So we still have those. We had a younger associate who George walked into his office and there was a pile of them in his trash bin, and he's like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "Well, what? I just tossed them. I don't need them." He's like, "No, you cross out your name and use them again." He had no idea, had not looked at it at all. So we saved some trees. So let's turn to benefits of having all 4, in some places, or all 5 generations in a workplace. Sarah and Addison, what do you see some of the benefits?
So this is not necessarily technology related, but it's happened to me on more than one occasion where I've been talking about a legal issue with someone who's in a different generation than I am, and they will cite to me a case from 1974 that they remember when it came out, and here's everything you should know about it. It truly has happened multiple times. I think that's really great. I don't necessarily know if that's generational or just people who have a better memory than me, but it's very impressive and a useful thing to have.
Yeah, I think that, and then also just knowing, the relationships that they've built in the legal community, especially because Omaha's, not a huge legal community. Knowing, especially like if you're going in front of a judge that you haven't gone in front of before, being able to go to the older partners and, ask them about, what to do and what not to do in front of them is incredible.
Are you looking at me as one of the older partners?
No.
It's funny you said that, Sarah, about a case, because another Judge Caprelli's story is sometimes when we have him research something and then he finds his own decision, to use in his research, and he'll see, I could have written that better. That was really hard to follow. So there is that experience. So how about you, John? What do you see from your side as far as some of the benefits of having all this?
Well, I think it's unlimited. It's critically valuable. Like any good business around the world, first of all, it's a business continuity issue. We're applauding ourselves on being in business for 150 years. We're not going to make another 150 without a continuous infusion of younger people every year. Second of all, our clients are from every generation. I mean, how stupid would it be if our lawyers and our legal assistants and our support staff are not? If we're going to understand our clients, we have to be able to relate to them, and it takes every generation working together to do that. The other thing I've done just personally a lot of reading on the psychology side of aging. This is one of the things you do when you're retiring. And there's some really interesting stuff out there about the way younger minds and older minds work, and the difference between more fluid intelligence, which is much more innovative, and the older workers who rely more on a sense of wisdom than sort of rapid fire response to things. You have to have all of that working together if you're going to do the job you need to do for your clients. I think it's pretty simple.
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. How about, and this maybe would be for Addison, but John, you've been in courtrooms once in a while too. Have you seen any differences in the judges and the interactions with judges or cases?
Well, I spent the first several years doing nothing but litigation, and have succeeded now for the better part of 40 years in staying out of the courtroom. So I don't know. I suspect the judges have gotten far ahead of me when it comes to technology, because I haven't had to keep up with that kind of stuff. All I'll say about not doing litigation for a number of years is I never had to understand electronic discovery, and I never will.
Right.
Very happy about that.
Yeah. I think some of it, I feel like there's a little bit more patience, maybe. Those of you that litigate, there might be more patience with the judges and that type of thing, a little bit more leniency. Or maybe it's just my age, a little bit less scary to go in and be not as worried of getting yelled at, even though that happens. One of my last jury trials in the last decade was in front of Judge McManus in Iowa, and he was a JFK appointee. And it was funny because the older attorneys who were on the case on the other side were terrified of him, because apparently he was just a terror in his day. Well, he was the sweetest gentleman and just a wonderful judge. And so his personality had definitely changed with age and was really great to try a case in front of. And so I think there's changes too as people age, and just have maybe different view of things as well. So what are some of the challenges? Whoever wants to lead in on this first, but what are some challenges that you face or that you see others facing with the generational differences at work?
I think one thing that came to mind for me, so being squarely in the millennial generation, I love texting, and it's usually my go-to form of communication. And I would say most of our coworkers are, fine, are you in the office? Shoot them a text. That's great. There are definitely some clients who fall into our generation who want to text with their attorneys about legal issues. And John has told us so many times, don't do that. And it's hard to, I guess, try to go away from that instinct to text someone, especially when a client says, can you just text me this information? Or if you need to reach me, just text me. And kind of getting away from that generational norm is difficult.
I think there's less of the pick up the phone with the younger generation and more of the texting or email, because they'll be like, have you talked to them about it? What? Pick up the phone and call? So I think there's less of that, and a lot of times that's useful, especially if you go by the mantra of don't write anything down. No, John, you didn't hear that.
I probably
didn't. John was also our general counsel, so we're always careful. Any other challenges, Addison or John, that come to mind?
Yeah. So I think one of the, especially just starting out and kind of trying to figure out what my role is and how I fit in the firm. I think figuring out different expectations from different generations or really just where they're at in their practice. If they're a brand new partner, I'm kind of finding that, expectations are, more like a little higher. And just because they're right in the heat of their practice. And I found that, with the people who have been partners for a long time, they're more kind of willing to take their time and explain it. And I feel like their expectations are a little bit more relaxed because they haven't had the high expectations imposed against them in a while. And so I think that's kind of the flip with the new partners, where they just came out of having really, really high expectations as an older associate. And so they kind of expect that as well.
Yeah.
So
I've found some of the lingo, like I know the younger ones make fun of me, but they'll text something and I have no idea what, I don't know, AC2R3 means, whatever that is. I'll be like, what? And then I'm on Google, what's this mean when you text it? And we have this very young IT guy, and one time he said, well, just turn on your OOO. And I'm like, and I Google it, I don't know. I email him back. I'm like, what are you talking about? What's my OOO? You're out of office. So every time I see him on the elevator, he's like, oh. So any other challenges that you've seen, John?
Well, I think the challenge for my generation and anybody older and eventually for yours, Heidi, is we have to accept that change. There is going to be change, and change is continually speeding up. There's a natural, I think, tendency as you get older to resist change and to maybe not accept the way things are done by younger generations, which I think is just a huge mistake and probably the one thing that puts up the most barriers. Sarah alluded to the fact that currently we officially have a no texting legal advice rule, but that might change. The technology changes. If you go back 20 or 25 years, probably law firms frowned on giving advice by email. Well, how silly would that look today? So we have to keep our eyes open, and we have to, I think, in my generation and others that follow, be much more open to change and to figuring out how these guys do it. I've always been someone who loves change, and that maybe differentiates me a little bit. But if I've got a legal need and Addison can get me the answer, I don't care how he does it. Just get it and get it done right. And it may not be the way I would do it. That's okay. I alluded to my granddaughter. I was having trouble on the computer the other day with something that I shouldn't know how to do. And she just popped in and did it. And I said, how did you do that? And I got the right answer was, you don't really need to know.
Oh.
And that needs to be just fine. It needs to be okay.
That's great. Yeah.
That's very good.
Yeah, and I feel like one of the challenges too, because with Gen X, we're kind of in that middle. And I was talking to the judge about this one time, and he's like, the pace that we work at is just unbelievable to him because he said, you think about it, Heidi, we'd get a legal demand letter or a letter in the mail. You'd have a day or two to think about your response, draft your response, proofread it, throw it back in the, throw that in the mail 3 days later. There was a lot more time to deliberate. And he said, you get like 12 of those within a half a day that the client's expecting a response right back on something that we would have taken 2 or 3 days to think about. And so I had never thought about that until he really explained that. And he said, it's just kind of mind blowing how the pace of work. And I don't know if that will continue. I don't know that can it get any faster? Like, it probably can, but at some point, there's that balance of having to think about, you got to take time to think about things as well. So, but clients' expectations also, depending on the generation, can influence that as well. So do you see differences in client expectations based on generation as well?
You're like, I don't know what generation all of the clients are.
Yeah, right.
I do think it is much more common to get really quick emails from like the millennial generation. You'll get something sometimes without a lot of context, a question sent via email, and you can see at the bottom sent from my iPhone.
Yep.
It's like they just took a moment out of their day to shoot off that message. And on the one hand, that's good because you can get in touch with clients and clients can get in touch with their attorneys really fast. On the other hand, I think sometimes things get maybe a little lost because those messages are sent so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I actually did think of something. So this is a client recently that they asked about a courtroom number for a hearing, and I think I mean gotta assume that they're younger simply because that I gave them the courtroom number and they respond and it doesn't have anything else. It's just cool with the glasses emoji, like the shades emoji, cool shades emoji. I was like, okay. Didn't know how to respond, so yeah, that was interesting.
I think it's changed the look of exhibits in a lot of lawsuits. The text, oh my goodness, exhibit 1 are these texts, and I don't know that people think that through either. It's amazing how these conversations that we would have in every day then become part of a lawsuit if something happens, and they sound completely different than what they were meant to be. So I think that changes as well.
I would think too, some of the lingo that shows up in our lawsuits is not something you would have seen 10 or even 5 years ago.
Oh, for sure.
I know, and I myself am guilty of this. I was thinking of a conversation I had with our former section leader in which I told him quite casually that the plaintiff in this case was a hot mess. And he had absolutely no idea what I was talking about. And so
Can you explain that to her?
yeah, and so I told him, it's very easy, just look it up in Urban Dictionary. And then he said, what is Urban Dictionary? So that sent us down this whole line of investigation where I, gave him these resources and it was really helpful to him, I'm sure. He was very tickled by it. But that kind of lingo shows up all the time in some of the things that we do, especially, in our employment world.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah.
I think too, for one big difference is the training opportunities. So since I'm kind of sandwiched in between the generations, when I started, it was not unusual, and Ken would probably have the same experience, where a partner would bring you along to a deposition or to a hearing, and you could all bill it. And clients don't do that anymore. And so it's harder when you have associates that still have to meet their billing requirements, possibly at the firm. You can't haul them with you everywhere because you can't bill all their time, and there's the pressure for them to meet hours. And so I think it's harder to train the younger attorneys, just because that's how I learned, was from watching others, from going to court or going to depositions. And we still do that, and you write it off, and you show it as a benefit to the client having 2 or 3 attorneys at something, and only charging for one. But it's a different scenario, because then it puts pressure on them. They still have to meet their goals. And so I do miss those days, and I think that is harder to do. So what moments in history, legal or otherwise, do you think come to mind for your generation in the law, or maybe shaped your career? So the first thing that comes to my mind, I think the O.J. Simpson verdict came out, while I was in law school. And so I remember we're all glued to the TV watching that come down. And then when I was working at federal court, Oklahoma City bombing was happening, and those things really kind of shape your career. And anything like that stand out for your generations, or made you want to be a lawyer, or affected how you view it?
I've got one. I started law school fall of 2019. Finished first semester, it was regular. Second semester, COVID.
Right.
So everything after that, I mean, we were the class that was the most affected by the pandemic. I didn't have a single in-person competition, or we have a mock trial competition or moot court competition, or 2 a year. That was all on Zoom. Our partners had to be in separate rooms. People are doing Zoom trials we're hearing about for the first time. And so I think that really, I think I can claim that one as being the event that really affected our generation.
How about you, John?
Well, my generation was dominated by Cold War, Vietnam, space race. If I think of something that might have had an impact, if not on me specifically, on the generation from a legal standpoint, it's probably Watergate. Was right before I went to law school, and there was just a bucket load of legal ethics wrapped up in Watergate. I remember, if my memory is correct, Elliot Richardson, an assistant attorney general, being basically fired for doing his job, which today you'd go, weekly event. But it was pretty stunning at the time, and I suspect had an impact on a lot of folks in my generation as they went through law school, thought about the role of lawyers, legal ethics.
Sarah, anything come to mind for you? I was just thinking about myself personally. I guess a lot of the media attention around immigration issues and legal immigration issues when I was sort of in, high school, college age, really got me interested in being a lawyer, because it highlighted, a lot of need in communities for legal assistance that might not otherwise have access. So I think that was personal for me. I don't know generationally if there's necessarily one thing that would have defined our millennial generation.
How has the marketing of legal services changed, or how is that affected by generations? I see it. I was kind of in between, where there's still the lunches, not the martini lunches necessarily, but a lot more of those lunches, in-person stuff. That's changed so much with COVID. But what did legal marketing look like when you started, John?
It was all FaceTime. In person, which is, if I have one fear coming out of the technology, it's do we lose too much FaceTime? Not to suggest that clever people like Addison and Sarah won't find alternative ways to stay in close contact with and get to know their clients personally, but it was all FaceTime, and being in the office was not necessarily a good thing if you could be out of the office at your client's place of business, or doing something socially with clients or what have you. So I don't know how I do it today. Happily, I don't.
Yes, yeah. I feel like I'm kind of in between, still trying to do that, but there's just so much of that. Marketing folks will, have you re-forwarded that tweet, or have you posted anything lately, or let us know when you've given that speech so you can put this on Facebook. And it's like, oh my gosh, it's just a little bit overwhelming to do it all. And so I think that is definitely a change.
One thing I'll add just for context, I would say easily the first 25 years of my career, if I was meeting with a client, it was almost 100% at their place of business, whether it's inside Omaha or outside Omaha. And I suspect that's a much more rare occurrence today.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of workplaces are like, I'll come to you because they don't want the lawyer. They don't want people asking, why are the lawyers here? So yeah.
I feel like on the flip side of that, during COVID, when pretty much everyone was starting to use Zoom or Teams or something else, there were clients that I had been talking to for 8 years that I'd never actually seen their faces. And so I would get on Zoom and be like, huh, okay, that's what you look like.
Yeah,
Matching the face to the voice. So it's the complete opposite now, I think.
Addison, what's any challenges with marketing so far? I know
I
you're
mean,
new and
yeah, you hit the nail on the head with the social media. It's just like it's a bit insane, honestly. And I'm not really prone to the social media
Right.
thing. Like I don't post often, and so it feels like that's something that I do have to do and have to adapt and get better at. Because it's just we're posting on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and you've got to repost and reshare all of that. And so yeah.
I feel like too, culture in the workplace was affected and is different for each generation. I I think like maybe the baby boomers and Gen Xers were more anxious to get back to work full time. Just in general, like back in the office, because that's what we grew up with. That's what we're used to. But I think maybe your generation is it's the flexibility is maybe a little bit more. I don't know. Easy for you to do. And I think that the culture was very hard for us to impart on associates who started during COVID. And I had associates start that I didn't see for a few months because we weren't in the office, and it's really hard. So we're rebuilding that, integrating everybody into the culture now that we're all back in the office. But do you see those differences at all? Do you feel like it's back to normal?
I feel like the younger generation, like especially us, the first years, like we're in the office like every day for the most part. Yeah, just nodding over there. For the most part, but it's actually tougher to get the attorneys who are parents back into the office. I've found, I think, or just people who just found that they really like working from home and don't want to come back in. And so I think that's kind of a challenge at times, especially when you really wish you could just walk down the hallway and stop in their office for a quick 2 seconds. But now you have to think about, is now a right time to call them, or should I call them, or should I email? Or so I think that's been a little bit challenging.
Even with clients, because you don't know
Right.
where they're working from. So, well, to switch gears a little bit, so as you may have can tell from Sarah's appearance, she is due in August with her first child. So I had my babies in 2002, 4, and 6, and so we were talking about the differences generationally for women when they had kids in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s to now. And one funny story, at least, or couple. I remember we were in front of a fairly harsh judge in Douglas County District Court, and a partner who isn't there anymore. I was out to hear pregnant. He's like, Heidi, why don't you go to that hearing? Because he'll be nice to you because you're pregnant. And I was like, I think, I don't know, would the younger generation take offense to that? I don't know. I went, did the hearing. It was pretty nice to me, so it worked. You do what you gotta do. But I feel like maybe maybe it's a stigma that we think the younger generation of women will be more offended than maybe we were, because we have tough skin, because we're Gen Xers or baby boomers, and we had to put up with it all. So that's kind of a view. So do you see any difference, Sarah? Or?
I mean, there are a couple of things that come to mind. On different ends of the spectrum. Just legally, there are a lot more protections for women who are pregnant and have children. We just finished our annual labor law forum and gave an entire session on two newer laws, the Pump Act, which provides protections for women who are breastfeeding in the workplace, and the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. So relatively new things that are getting tacked onto already existing laws that obviously haven't always been around. So legally, there are those protections in the workplace too. I think, something else that comes to mind, just earlier this week, we had a meeting of our women attorneys at the firm, and one of the women had mentioned, if anyone is a new mom or considering being a new mom, there are a lot of us here that can answer your questions about being a working mom in the legal field. And just looking around the room and realizing how many women attorneys there were who had kids, and knowing that those people were resources, I think really changes the experience, because for some people, they were the first woman attorney in their firm to have a child.
Right.
And so I think that just sets up a different sort of playing field.
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. I think, yeah. And I think we've had more, compared to the attorneys who had their kids maybe in the 70s or 80s, I think the female attorneys, maybe my age and younger, we had a little bit more flexibility. Like I went part-time for a while, and that was kind of unheard of, I think, in the 70s and 80s for the most part. Now we do have that. We had one partner go off partnership track for a while and then came back, as our kids got older. And so I think that has changed with the generations as well. One of my favorite generational stories related to gender as well is I had a friend who was a lawyer in Texas, and this would have been back in the 90s, when she said she'd go into court, and there was one judge down there who insisted on calling the female attorneys lawyerettes. And I started laughing because I grew up, I was in high school in the 80s, and I'm from Trainer. So I was, at that point, we were the Trainer Cardettes. The boys were the Cardinals. We were the Cardettes. So I'm like, that's pretty funny. But I tell other people that story, and they're like, that is not funny. So I'm like,
shaking my head.
Yeah, see? Easily offended. So there's definitely been changes, I think, over the years. So I want to turn back to you, John. So if you looked back, what time of your practice would you say was the most enjoyable?
It's going to sound like a dodge, but I would say all of it. I mean, I've been very fortunate. I've loved really every phase of my legal career. I will say several years I stepped outside Baird Home to be general counsel for one of our clients. And we had several hundred employees in the office, and I was the only lawyer, so I was always right.
Yeah.
And then I went back into a law firm where I was pretty much always wrong. But I've enjoyed it all. Just been very fortunate.
Yeah. Well, when I started, they said whatever John says, he's always right. So I don't know.
I don't think anybody's said that.
I think, it varies. I liked the early, I think, a little bit slower pace before all the technology, email, 150 emails a day or whatever. But there's definitely, I think
Yeah, I'll tell you though, I love the technology. I mean, the ability to work remotely, to have a flexible schedule is enormous. I wouldn't, unlike some of my peers, I wouldn't go back 30 years for a second.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And yes, technology helps so much. Do you guys even know what whiteout is?
Hey, come on.
So I think about how often I would have to use whiteout, go retype something, and so it definitely has helped. Let's talk a little bit about the future and what you view. So for Addison, for your generation and maybe the next generation, what do you think the workplace, what changes or what adaptations will need to be made, do you think, for that generation and yours as we go forward?
Yeah, I think it's no secret that we need to adapt to what's happening with AI. And I think that that's going to come really fast. So I really don't even know I couldn't tell you what 5 years from now practice looks like, because I think it's going to look incredibly different.
Is there, what what do you think their view of work-life balance is? Your generation,
generation?
And the ones below you.
Yeah. I agree. I think it's where it's for the most part, it's work to live. Everybody kind of wants to be able to have a flexible schedule, mental health days, work from home, take multiple vacations. So I think that's kind of the mindset of my generation for the most part.
John, when you started in the law, had you even heard the term work-life balance?
I don't know if I had or not. I've heard a lot over my career. I have for a very long time been a fan of a different phrase, which I refer to as work-life integration, where you figure out, and I think the technology is enormously beneficial for this. To me, being a lawyer was more than just a job. I mean, it's to a large extent your identity, it's your role in the community, it's the way you positively affect society. And I never liked it being an on-off switch. As long as you can control to some extent your schedule and your accessibility. I remember once thinking when a client tracked me, this is before cell phones or computers or email, client tracked me down at home on a Sunday because he had a serious legal need. I thought that was the most awesome thing ever because I was part of his operation and was needed and was able to, take an hour off from whatever I was doing in the family and resolve things. I think we have to find our own balance, and I think it's a cop out to blame the boss or the company or the firm for not giving you sufficient work life balance. You have to find it yourself, figure out what works for you, and advocate for it.
I feel like when I started, I had never heard that term, and so Gen Xers, I mean, we were still like, you gotta grind and put in the hundreds and hundreds of hours, and we're just bitter about it because we didn't think about pushing for work-life balance. So too late, no. But I think that's a very, that's a key thing as well. So, what stereotype of your generation are you most proud of?
Easily offended.
Well, that's so stupid.
Yeah.
I think probably the ability to adapt to new technologies. So when I was growing up, I think, as I was finishing high school was right when social media was becoming a thing. Like I think Facebook was starting, or at least becoming available to people right as I was graduating from high school. So kind of growing up with some of those technologies and being able to figure out pretty easily how to use the next thing has been helpful. So that's probably one for me.
Yeah. How about you, John?
I don't know. I'm not even sure what my generation's stereotypes are. I haven't really paid much attention to that.
Indecisive. Oh, wait.
Yeah, that could be one. And I don't really remember the ones you mentioned earlier. So, on the flip side of it, I'm at an age where our generation is becoming the one that says all these younger generations, they don't have any work ethic, they don't do this right, they don't do that. And it's, our parents did it, and our grandparents did it, and our great grandparents did it. And I think that's what's just got to stop is, and if I had a message for my generation and older, it would be just knock it off and find out what the younger lawyers can do, because they're every bit as capable as we were. They just do things differently, and that's the way things will be done in the future. So what bristles me is when I hear people saying, "Oh, they're just, they don't know what they're doing. They're lazy. They don't have a good work ethic," and it's just all nonsense.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
I would say for Gen X, probably independent would be, I think we were my kids can't imagine a time when somebody couldn't track them on their phone and know where they were at all times. Thank God my parents couldn't do that. So, so we're kind of the last ones with a lot of that independence, and so I think we kind of thrive on that. So. Let's talk about communication styles, and we've kind of touched on that. But what communication styles do you think will work the best for your generation coming up, Addison, or the next coming up? Because it does seem like even my kids, like their first instinct is not to call somebody. Like if they have an issue, it's text or something, or snap or something, and I'm like, just pick up the phone, and they'll be like hesitant to do that. So what do you see?
So I think for the most part, it's probably more like that. For me, I am terribly slow at texting, and so I do divert to the call. But I know that most people in my generation are regular speed texters, and that's more efficient and convenient for them. So yeah, I think communication for my generation is, I think we like short but very direct and detailed, so that we don't have to do as much follow up or.
Do you have different requests from generations at the firm? Like, does my generation or older still request memos, or just summarize it in an email, or do you get different requests based on generation?
Yeah, I think so. For the most part, the older generations still like memos. And yeah, the newer partners are like, yeah, throw it in an email, make it quick.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. I found that when I asked Judge Caparelli to research something, it's a very formal memo with the heading and the topic and the issue, just like we learned in law school, short answer, issue, and it is helpful, and it's probably more helpful in the long run that we have those in our document system for somebody else to use. If it's in an email, it's a little bit harder to find it again. So how about you, Sarah? What's the most effective way for communication, do you think, for your generation or for you? What do you prefer?
I feel like because I was am squarely in the middle of the millennial generation, I'm pretty comfortable with both phone calls and texts and emails, because I grew up with only the ability to make phone calls until, I was in my late teens, really. So I think that most people that, are sort of around the same timeline as me feel the same, but yeah.
There's big differences. I've noticed with my kids too. I think most workplaces, do you use Word or Google Docs? Most Word, right? So college and school, it's all Google Docs, and I'm like, they're like, how do you? So if I'm helping with the paper or editing something, how do you not know that, Mom? Like, how do you not know? I said, you will never use this in the future. So I see that as like, but maybe it won't matter because they're so adaptable, they'll switch to Word easily. But I've seen that kind of a generation gap with my kids.
Well, I'll just remind you, at one point, we thought word perfect was all anyone would ever use. Okay? And we were wrong.
That's true.
So, wasn't quite so perfect, was it? Yeah, that's a good point. Absolutely. So, well, as we get close to our time, I know we're supposed to leave some time for some questions or comments, or if anybody else has a funny generational story to share, but we'd be happy to talk about any other topics.
So I have a question.
Yes.
In 20 years, will we be giving legal advice in the metaverse? Sounds silly, but
We may.
might have to have a Roblox account to be a lawyer.
Yeah.
I really think like this artificial intelligence is going to be a game changer, and I hope I'm retired before it gets to that. So, yeah. Yes.
Good afternoon. My name is Corey Taylor. You were just talking about some of the things that happen in legal careers. I'm just curious, from your perspective, how like the 2008, 2010, or 11 time frame when a lot of associates got laid off. And I was in the class of 2008 when a lot of associates got laid off. And I know that there are at least some hints, given the economy and inflation and stuff like that, of at least some of the firms starting to offer associates money to go do something else for a year or something like that. So do you think that is something that firms need to prepare for the next generation, so that we don't lose generation of lawyers?
It's funny you said that, because we had a friend talk about they'd been offered to go do something for a year, and like they're still going to pay them something to that, or almost a sabbatical or something like that. And I think that will be something to come, and we're still there. Some reports are we still haven't seen the full recession. So, unless you're a bankruptcy or collections attorney, that you'll have for sure job security. I think that is a very real thing. And then as a result, I think we lose a lot of those lawyers because they start to do something else and find maybe they enjoy it more or don't want to come back to the rat race that maybe they were in. And so I think that will definitely happen. I think we may see that. I don't know if you guys agree or disagree or what you're seeing.
Yeah, I'm not sure, I wasn't in the legal market during that first time frame from sort of the 2008 to 2011, but I have heard a little bit about it and sort of its impacts, at least on the Omaha legal market. And I think I am hopeful that our Omaha legal market is a little bit more resistant to some of those things than some of the larger legal markets and places that might overhire or hire more people than they need.
Right.
So I guess I'm hopeful, but it's always a possibility.
Right. Yeah. Any other thoughts or? Oh, you had a question.
From each of you, I guess, how do you best navigate older generations in the workplace not wanting to or being more resistant to technology and emailing, and we encounter that in the workplace? It's someone who's just very resistant to change or adapting. How do each of you? Because you said you adapt to it, you like it, you love it. So I just wonder.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you a very brief story. When we first adopted computers at Baird Home, I had a legal secretary who was phenomenally good. She'd been around forever though, and she didn't trust them. And we eventually had to literally force her on fear of not working there anymore to be trained. And after a week of training, she so fell in love with it because she was used to, she would type a 2-page letter, and if there was one error, she'd retype the whole 2-page letter. And when she found out you could fix that in like 5 seconds. So I'm not enough of an HR person to tell you the best way. You just have to communicate, show examples, find people in their generation who have succeeded at it and let them be your warriors for you.
I think my answer is maybe a little bit similar. I found that the best way to navigate some of those things are to explain some of the really great perks of the new technologies instead of trying to force it on people, helping them figure out how it's going to actually make their life easier. And 2 examples come to mind, both deal with the same partner at our firm who I will not name by name. We had, when I first started, there was this huge treatise that we used all the time, and it got passed back and forth around offices, and he was going around looking for it on one occasion, and he asked me if I'd seen it, and I said, no, I never used that. That entire treatise is available on Westlaw, right? He had absolutely no idea, and it changed his day-to-day use of that and ability to search within the treatise too. So that was really great. And then this other just hilarious example with the same colleague where we have a phone system that will show you, when one of your coworkers is on the phone. And I knew this handy little trick that would alert me when somebody got off the phone. So when I, really wanted to talk to him about something, but he was on the phone for a long time, I just click alert me when he's available. And eventually he just accused me of being a stalker because I would just call him immediately after he hung up his phone at any time. He's like, how do you know? Are you waiting? Like, do you have spies in my hallway? Like, no. And I told him about it, and it just changed his life. And I'm really proud of it.
I didn't even know we had this.
Yeah, there you go. All you gotta do is right click.
I didn't know.
Yeah.
So I would say like you said, training, teaching, but I will say and Chris is she's probably laughing back there because I like paper. And I'm a little more resistant to some technology. And so I think we're pretty tolerant of, we try to adapt systems because everybody kind of has a different system, how they learn or see things. I think we spot more errors on paper than we do on a screen. So like I tell associates, if you're writing something for me, print it out and edit it and then bring it to me. So some don't like that, So I think you kind of learn who you work with the most, kind of what they prefer. But there are certain things that we're resistant to. But I think as a whole, we just figure out what works for each other. And Mhm. Right. Yeah. Right. Yep. hmm Yep. Yeah. Well, my 2 cents too. I'm a huge fan of the Gen Z because I'm raising Gen Zers. And I was talking to a college professor who said that the Gen Z generation, not to, sorry, close your ears, Sarah and Addison, but they said this generation, like they're really hard workers and they're really curious. Not that you guys aren't. But like she just saw that a lot of natural drive, I think in a broader group than she had seen maybe for some years. And so it also gives us hope, I think, too, that they'll adapt well to that. But to your other point, like we're struggling with that, frankly, as well as a law firm because, yeah, these big companies come along and say, we'll pay you twice and you can sit at home and do what you're doing. And, and it's harder for firms to do that because we can only bill out at so much per hour. So I think at some point, I don't know what the answer is other than pay more. Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. Right. I agree. And we've gone, I don't know if you guys or your place or other places, like we do give a little bit more flexibility, like, hey, pick a day a week, you're going to work from home if your attorney doesn't need you in the office, and they can kind of shuffle that around. Anybody else do something like that? You guys? Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. Any other answers you guys have that the answer to retaining our good talent? I think the answer is flexibility because that's what they want. That's what they're leaving for. So, yeah. One more.
Or talk about talent. What's the generational differences of utilizing your paralegals and other support staff?
Mm-hmm. That's a good one. I am a heavy paralegal user. I think I use more than the younger generations. I also have zero attention to detail, so therefore I definitely Chris is laughing. I could not practice law without Chris and Kim and Casey. I just couldn't do it. And so I think that my generation and up, what I've seen, we're very dependent. I'd be curious what Chris and Kim see and but I don't know. Do you guys use paralegal?
So for me, it's just trying to figure out how to use them, what to use them for, in the first year of practice. It's just figuring everything out and trying to figure out what's the best and most efficient way to get the work done.
Yeah, I think a lot of what I would ask for help with would be technology that I'm not familiar with. Especially when it's discovery related technology. And, we've got a lot of really great paralegals who have been using this technology for years. And I know that they're able to do things much more efficiently than if, I or someone else were to try to sit down and learn a whole new system that's even, coming from where I think I can learn technology pretty well. But having people who have that experience with it is really great.
Yeah, but I think there are differences, and because I'll be like, "Hey, Chris, can you print out those emails from that file? You just got no, I cannot. It's 20,000 pages. Like I didn't know, so
I'll be like, don't give me a paper file.
Right, and I'm like, I love paper, so well, thank you.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. Recognize a lot of familiar faces in the crowd. Fantastic turnout. Heidi and her team really touched on a lot of the points. And so that's why she ran into our time, because she knew that I'd take 10 minutes less. So no offense. But So we're here to talk about legal update, right? Age discrimination to legal update. So of course, what we try to do, because we're trying to cover different generations, we're trying to cover everything from the ADEA to AI, right? All of these nice little acronyms. So we are going to get going here. Age Discrimination in Employment Act. We're going to start at the very basic level, right? It's actually, believe it or not, a part of the FLSA, which is the Fair Labor Standards Act. It was added in 1967, so it would have been in the John Bruning era. And the damages are different, but somewhat the same, right? You can't get compensatory or punitive damages, but you can get liquidated damages. And for any Age Discrimination in Employment Act claim, they use the same EEOC Administrative Procedure requirement, which means before you file a lawsuit, you have to file a charge with the EEOC. Covers people over 40 as of the time of the adverse employment action. Adverse employment action is any adverse condition that affects you in your terms and conditions of your employment. So when it was first enacted, the ADEA covered if you were age 40 to 65. Well, then they figured out, well, we might need to go later. So they said, okay, we're going to do 40 to 80. And then in 1986, they say, well, we're going to remove the upper limit altogether. Anybody want to take a guess as to why? Yeah, people are working older and older and older. And like John Bruning would have been covered until he's 65. And then all of a sudden you can fire him at 66 because of his age, and you probably might not be covered as it was originally enacted. Most common claims under the Age Discrimination Employment Act are discharge, like so someone's terminated because of their age. They're laid off, so you have a reduction in force or a group termination for a company, and you're selecting people based on, sometimes people might say seniority is a factor, and you might catch a lot of the people that are in the older part of the workforce, right, 60 plus. So whenever you're going to be doing one of those reductions in force, you want to, or a group termination, what do you want to do? You want to line up everybody, do a disparate impact study to make sure you're not disparately impacting any protected group, whether it's not just age, right? You want to make sure that you're lining it up based and identifying people based on the different protected characteristics that you know of. Hostile work environment, that can be based on age as well. That's covered by the ADEA. And a failure to hire or promote. That's a fairly common claim, especially for workers that have been in the organization for a while, but then all of a sudden you might say, well, they haven't adapted to the different technology, and so all of a sudden they might be passed over for promotions or advancements, and they're going to make a claim that it's because of their age. And then typically what is included in that is a failure to train, because a lot of times they go, well, hey, that's great, but you didn't train me on this new technology. Otherwise, I would have been able to adapt because I am smart, capable, and I can fulfill the duties and the responsibilities of my position. So these are all taken from cases. Most claims are based upon remarks that people might see as endearing or maybe not as slanderous as the person on the receiving end. I know Heidi was talking about someone being offensive, or easily offended, I guess. And I think that a lot of times what you'll find is some people, when you're talking about their age, are easily offended. And especially if you start using certain terms. One case that we had that was really frustrating was someone kept calling someone a young American and an old American. And they thought that they were being kind, and all of a sudden, right, they get fired or an adverse employment action happens against them, and what happens? That becomes a word that they say was used against them disparagingly, and it becomes part of the lawsuit. Too slow, can't change. And then the reverse age statements. A lot of times when you're looking to hire people into the company, what do you say? Well, we need new blood in here, right? We need a new way of thinking. We need to transform the organization. We need to look beyond the old guard. And so it creates the impression that when you're looking to hire, you're looking for younger people as opposed to new people. And so we just need to be conscious as we're going through the hiring and interviewing process that we're not using those terms. Mandatory retirement is always something that comes up in age claims, right? It's been pretty much phased out of most workforces. We still see it. For those of you who don't know, Jackson Lewis is a national labor and employment firm, so we only do labor and employment, only from the management side. We have 61 offices, about 1,000 attorneys, and so we see it in college professors. There's still some collective bargaining agreements where you do have a mandatory retirement age. Airline pilots, anybody want to take a guess why? High-level decision makers in companies, those are really the only places where we typically see any sort of mandatory retirement age. Age discrimination, right? When you're talking about age discrimination, can you link it to a bona fide occupational qualification, right? So if you can say that that there's a facially neutral bona fide occupational qualification, then you might be able to sort of get around an age discrimination type claim. So in actors, we see this, right? Like except in Harrison Ford's case, right? Because you always say if you want an action star, a lot of times people are looking for a younger actor. And I'm sitting here waiting to see what's going to happen with the new Indiana Jones movie, because there is one. And apparently the two things that Harrison Ford said are, number one, I don't want any age jokes, verbal age jokes. You can do anything, but no verbal age jokes. And the second thing is they have looted all of the prior Indiana Jones movies to try and use CGI to mimic some of his moves that he can't do now. So I'd say Harrison Ford might be the exception to that rule. Lifeguards and firefighters are usually covered by a physical test, right? So that's going to be a bona fide occupational qualification that would typically be facially neutral and a way to, I don't want to say get around, but defend against an age discrimination claim. For those of you who don't typically practice labor and employment, typically you prove age discrimination either by direct evidence, so statements that were made to the person, or if you don't have any direct evidence, they have a burden shifting framework, as in most discrimination cases. So the way that this works is, first of all, the plaintiff has to walk in and prove that they were over 40, that they were qualified for the job, that there was an adverse employment action that was taken against them. Once that happens, then the burden shifts to the defendant to offer a legitimate, non-discriminatory reason for the action, and then the burden shifts back to the plaintiff to convince the trier of fact, the jury, or the judge that age was a factor. Now, under the Age Discrimination and Employment Act, which the Nebraska Fair Employment Practices Act has adopted, age has to be the but-for cause of the adverse employment action. So in some types of like Title VII cases, you have a motivating factor or a mixed factor that's acceptable. And under the Iowa Civil Rights Act, they still use the motivating factor test, but there is an actual but-for test under the Age Discrimination and Employment Act. The ironic thing is that it was a Iowa Des Moines attorney that argued the case on behalf of, I believe it was FedEx in 2009, that resulted in the but-for factor, but it still hasn't been adopted in Iowa. A couple recent cases that I just want to touch on. It will get a little bit more interesting. I can't just stand up here and do cases the entire day. But Smothers versus Rowley Masonic Assisted Living Community. So this was a March case from the 8th Circuit. What happened here is you had a approximately 15-year employee who was 59 years old, and they saw this nurse at the assisted living community going in and out of one resident's room fairly frequently. They figured out that this person had a side gig as a nurse and was providing separate services to this resident. They said it's a conflict of interest for you to be a nurse for us and a nurse on the side providing the same service to this resident, so you can't do it. It's against our conflict of interest policy. She took issue with that. They reported it to the nursing department in Iowa, and then they saw her, even after they counseled her, she was still going back into the room, and they thought that there was undue influence that was happening. She was hoping to get some of the residents' money, so they again reported it, and there was an ongoing investigation. The department got back to them and said, hey, we don't think anything untoward's going on. And she said, okay, I want my job back, because she was just on an unpaid suspension. They said, no, we're going to wait until we get the written report, and then we'll reinstate you. Once we get the written report, she resigns, claims constructive termination, and she says one of the reasons was that I was fired was because of my age. Now, the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals granted summary judgment, or affirmed summary judgment, on behalf of the employer here. And they said that all of the adverse employment actions she complained of, which was a 5-day suspension, which turned into an indefinite suspension while they waited for the written report, and the denial of back pay, were not based upon age. Her evidence, she didn't have any direct evidence, was she said, here's a list of terminated employees that shows that it wasn't just me, it was other people that were in my same age group over 40. Also, there was testimony from the nursing home director that said, hey, I'm not as worried about younger employees dating residents as I am about older employees dating residents because of the age gap. And the court said that that's not enough, and we're going to go ahead and sustain the summary judgment motion. Age discrimination typically is not an easy road to go down if you're a plaintiff's attorney. And the next case is this from the Iowa Supreme Court. Try to get a couple from 2023. Thank you to our law clerk down here for finding them for me. And there was this 30-year veteran of Swift Pork Company in Iowa, and he really hadn't had any prior discipline. He, at some point, got a new supervisor. They didn't really get along too well. At one point, they had a confrontation, and then after hours, this feedback sent a text to his supervisor that said, F you, believe who and what you want, in response to an accusation that the supervisor had confronted him about. They terminated him for insubordination, and he said, no, you're not terminating me for insubordination. You're terminating me because I am 60 years old, and you're just trying to get rid of me. And I have no prior discipline. Everyone curses here, and so why me? And the court in Iowa, which was a state court, actually granted summary judgment in favor of the employer, which is kind of hard to believe because state court summary judgment isn't always easy to get. And they said that this guy claimed, well, it was a mistake. I texted him, it was a mistake. Everyone curses here. And by the way, every older worker that we have here is forced out. The court says, well, no, because the only time you claimed it was a mistake wasn't until the next day when they called you out on it and reported you to HR. But you didn't send any text messages between the night when you sent it and the report to HR. So we don't really believe you that it was a mistake. Second of all, everyone curses, but nobody really sent it in a text message to their boss, and you haven't provided any evidence of anybody that did. So we don't think that there's adequate comparators. And third, other workers that are old, over 40, who were forced out, well, the evidence showed that the defendant had more than 100 workers over 60 at the time that the plaintiff was terminated. So they said that's not going to fly either. So a long time ago, I was in a CLE that Judge Battalion from our federal court here, he was giving it, and he said, look, I don't always grant summary judgment in favor of employers. And for those of you who have practiced in front of him, he rarely does, right? But he said, but it would be almost malpractice in the Eighth Circuit if you don't move for summary judgment in favor, in an employment case in the Eighth Circuit, whether you're in Iowa, Nebraska. And so I think these two cases show that, and it rings true. So what are we seeing now? Oh, one more thing. A lot of people just think about the Age Discrimination Employment Act. Everyone's going, what's the OWBPA, right? It's the Older Worker Benefit Protection Act. And so this is another age protection for people that are over 40. And if you're doing a severance agreement or a release agreement for an employee or a group of employees that are over 40, you really need to make sure that you're complying with the Older Worker Benefit Protection Act. So basically what this means is in the severance agreement, you need to include certain language. You need to inform them of their right to confer with an attorney. You need to tell them what it is that they're waiving. the big one is you need to give them 21 days to consider the agreement. And then after they sign it, you have to give them 7 days to revoke it. So at the time that you give it to them, you can't turn around and say, you got to sign it now or never, or say, hey, I need this back by tomorrow. You have to give that person that's over 40 21 days to review it. And this is something that not a lot of people are typically aware of. And then the other consideration is on this 7-day revocation, obviously you don't want to pay that person their severance until expiration of the 7-day period. We've seen some of those. Those are not pretty. And there's an additional requirement in case of a group release. And a group, what do they say? It takes 2 to tango, right? A group is 2 or more. So if the employer is terminating 2 or more people and giving them severance as part of this group termination, that 21-day period is extended to 45 days to consider the agreement. And you also have to include a list of employees that were considered for the reduction in force of the group termination and who was selected or not selected. And you don't have to name names, but you do have to put the position and you have to put the ages of the people. And I always say this is an exhibit to the severance agreement that you give them. And so you have to think long and hard when you're doing this to 2 or more employees about whether you want that, because what happens? They get the severance agreement, they get the exhibit, and they're probably going to go visit an attorney who's going to say, let me see that exhibit, kind of like what we touched on at the beginning. If it's a reduction in force, they're going to do their own analysis of if 20 people were let go and 100 people work here, what are the ages of those 20 people? And is it skewed on the 40 plus side or even 60 plus side? So now we get into a little bit of fun stuff, right? What are some sort of the new frontier of age discrimination? Well, have you guys ever used social media and job ads pop up, right? All of a sudden you have a chance to be employed, or there is an ad for some weird thing because you were talking about it in the car with your husband or your wife or your significant other on the way to this event, right? And all of a sudden something pops up on your Facebook feed. Well, you're seeing the ad because when you create an ad for Facebook, and maybe some of you are at companies that have done Facebook ads, you can select who you want to see it. You can select males, you can select females, and you can select age ranges, and you can select geography. And so what was happening is people were saying, well, I'm going to advertise for positions, and I want people that are men, and I want men between the age of 20 and 40 who live and work near, in this case, Silver Spring, Maryland, right? And so now you're automatically casting your net to a very narrow demographic of people that are automatically getting the ad for your position, and you're excluding then a lot of people from getting that ad automatically as well. And so we've kind of touched on this. This is the audience selection tools that if you're doing an ad on Facebook, you get to pick who you see or who you select to see it. And maybe at the forefront of their time, good, it shows up better than I thought it was going to. This is from 2017. And of course, the good things start on the coast, right? So this is a California class action that was brought, and it was brought against a number of different defendants, T-Mobile, Amazon, Cox Communications, Cox Media Group, because they were doing exactly that. And the allegations are that you, T-Mobile, for example, were targeting people ages 18 to 38 who live or were recently in the United States for certain job opportunities. And the sole claim in here is an age discrimination claim because these companies were targeting people using these Facebook ads. And again, this is just another example of the allegations with this lawsuit. So then that's from 2017. And so we hope that companies have maybe taken a little bit of a note to realize, okay, we have to change this. So what are companies doing now? What we're seeing is the use of additional sort of AI tools to select people based upon certain seemingly bona fide occupational qualifications, but which may nonetheless, using AI, sort of narrow the selection criteria to where you're only getting candidates on your desk that are in a very narrow group. And you might not even be aware that the AI tool that you're using might be having an adverse impact on people that are outside of certain age groups or racial groups or sex or gender groups. So one example is we have this biometrics game that uses neuroscience-based games to assess candidates. So you have a set of 12 questions, essentially. You get 3 minutes to answer each, and then your results will go to the hiring authorities for the different companies that use this. And what they found is that some of these tests, essentially, right, are getting people who it might have a better result for white individuals than it does for black individuals that take this test, or males versus females. Then the next one that we're seeing is video-based assessments to analyze tone and facial expressions. So during the interview, there are now AI software that companies will hook up that as you're talking on the interview, that gives the company ideas about, based upon your tone, based upon your facial expressions, are you telling the truth? And what are some other things that we should be evaluating? And then that will kick out a report at the end based upon what AI has evaluated, not necessarily based on what you said, the substance, but based upon different nonverbal communication cues that are in the way that you speak. So the EEOC has weighed in on this. In 2022, the EEOC launched its and I gotta give them credit for their names, right? I mean, Artificial Intelligence and Algorithmic Fairness Initiative. That's fantastic. I mean, that's not something you just come up with on the fly. You really put some thought into that. And it's not even a cool acronym, right? It doesn't spell anything fun. And so they've sort of doubled down on this because it's continued, right? So in 2022, they launched this. And recently, less than a month ago, they actually put out technical assistance Q&A for this initiative. And what they've said is, if you are using algorithms in your hiring or performance evaluation process, we want to alert you that this can lead to discriminatory practices and increased risk. And so then they say, well, what are these? That includes resume scanners, right? So there's AI tools out there that companies are using to actually scan resumes. So before it hits the hiring person's desk, as the resumes come in, some companies are using AI tools to scan it and naturally filter out some and filter in some, because they'll compare it to, okay, here's the job description, and so here's what, as a company, we're looking for this position. Does it match what's on the resume? And if not, it filters it out. And then as you accept and hire people, the AI, of course, learns. And so let's say you hire 3 white people in a row. AI is like, okay, I'm learning. And you don't know what AI is doing on the back end, but then what they found is sometimes AI, because it wants to please us, right? It starts going and implementing filters that we haven't even programmed it to analyze. It also covers virtual assistants that ask candidates about their qualifications and reject some video interviewing software. And so the EEOC hasn't said these are bad. What they've said is, if you use these, you need to make sure that you're protecting against discrimination based upon all these protected characteristics. And how do we do that? Well, the EEOC has said you can use the 4/5 rule, which is do your own audit of these systems and figure out, is my system being discriminatory and I don't even know it? And they've said that using a vendor or a third party to run these things for you is not a safe harbor. So you're responsible even if your vendor is the one you're using the AI. Other AI legislation that's currently pending. New York, of course, like I said, it goes from the coast in. New York has implemented AI legislation that takes effect on July 5th. And it's currently pending also in Massachusetts, New Jersey, Vermont, Washington, Illinois. All right. That ends the age discrimination piece of our program, and now we get into some other fun things. Caitlin is going to take over for a while, and then I'll be back. Oh, and I forget, generational difference, I like to stand.
So Ken mentioned earlier some of the legal protections on age. Can you hear me? Does everybody hear me? Closer? Okay. There are also some just general laws that are going to protect appearance. These laws are generally covering tattoos, piercings, and colorful hair. And we need to consider, in addition to these protections, that these might be triggered when talking about appearance or in the workplace. We often think about religion when talking about appearance, and that could be a policy that applies to head covering is one that generally comes up. But there's also implications with age discrimination, the Crown Act, which I'll talk about more, and then national origin. With national origin, it might be henna. So if there is a policy saying no tattoos or no body paint, well, henna might come up, and that could be discriminatory if you say no to that, but the reason they have it is due to their national origin. So this one, for the Crown Act, this does have a cool acronym. The Crown Act stands for Creating a Respectful and Open World for Natural Hair. Nebraska in 2021 was actually the 10th state to pass this Crown Act legislation. And the Crown Act, what it covers is employers cannot discriminate against trades historically associated with race, including hair texture, hair type, protective hairstyles such as braids, locks, and twists. In 2019, Dove did a study that found Black women are 30% more likely than other women to receive a formal grooming policy or be sent home due to their hair. So the Crown Act is in place in part to prevent that. A good example is there was a famous comment made against the actress Zendaya at the Oscars a couple of years ago, where a news host said that her braids looked like she smelled like patchouli oil and weed. So it was a comment meant to be funny, but it wasn't. And not only was it offensive, but it was also potentially discriminatory because it made that comment based on her hair, which also had implications to her race. So comments like that under the Crown Act, well, they would potentially be covered under race discrimination anyways, but as the Crown Act makes clear that those comments might not just be offensive, but also discriminatory. The federal, like I said, back when Nebraska passed this law, there was the 10th, which is impressive for Nebraska. Since then, I think over 20 states have passed a similar Crown Act. There's a lot of local ordinances that are similar. Federally, a bill has been introduced, or it was, and it passed the House, but it failed the Senate. We talked about this a little bit earlier in the other presentation, but for the first time, there are workers from 5 different generations in the workforce. This is largely because of people retiring later. So in addition to thinking about different legal protections on appearance, it's also really important to think specifically on generational perceptions of appearance. Specifically, with so many different generations in the workplace, what is considered by that generation to be professional may wildly be different. For an example, with tattoos, there was a 2015 study that showed 29% of the US population had a tattoo. But in comparison of millennials, half of them had tattoos. I know in my office, and I don't know if Ken's noticed this, but I would say more than half of our associates, we have visible tattoos. And so because it's more prevalent in certain generations, that generation may not see it as unprofessional. For me, when I see somebody with a visible tattoo, I'm more associated with that individual's individuality or something that might be important to them. I often think of it as an opening to ask, hey, what does your tattoo mean? While in contrast, somebody from an older generation might say, while the person may be more of a rebel, they don't necessarily have the same views of me as what's professional in the workplace. That's not to say, I mean, I do cover my tattoos in court because I do understand that there is a generational difference. But when companies are looking to enact policies, it's important to think about, well, is that employee being unprofessional, or is it now looking towards is what is considered professional changing? Another example is that you might see, especially with Gen X, is footwear. I know heels used to be the go-to professional shoe. I would say a lot of times now it's white tennis shoes. So you'll take a pair of trousers and a t-shirt with a blazer and throw on white tennis shoes. Some of that is they've learned, why am I going to wear a shoe that's bad for my back when I could wear a white tennis shoe and just be just as effective but comfortable? And so if there's a policy that's requiring heels, younger generations may not have that same value or may not understand it. A good example of when I was going through law school and looking to apply to jobs, there were certain organizations that required you to wear pantyhose to work. For me, wearing pantyhose just sounds uncomfortable. It's never been something that I grew up with, and it just, to me, that doesn't associate professionalism. And so there are candidates that might say, well, I don't even want to apply because I see no value in that. Instead, it feels like an extra step. And so considering some of those considerations of, is this professional? Who might consider it to be professional? So when thinking about professionality and appearance, this mostly comes up in companies when you're drafting an appearance policy. Not every company has one, but if you do have one, there's things to take into consideration when drafting it. The number one is don't call it a personal appearance policy. Instead, because that does sound like discrimination. We're discriminating against you, how you look, instead of this is our expectation of what you look like in our workplace. And you do want to ensure that there's a legitimate reason that you're going to have that policy in place and the different items in the policy. You also want to ensure they are applied consistently. One that comes up with, say, colorful hair. If you have an employee, a white employee who dyes their hair fire engine red, but then you have a black employee with braids who puts violet in it. And you tell the black employee, hey, you can't have colorful hair. Well, they might think that that's discriminatory because you allow the white employee to have the bright red hair. So thinking through how some of those are applied and whether, do you even really care if there is colorful hair? You also want to give a avenue if somebody does have a question about the appearance policy, or if they might need an accommodation. So if you have a policy, no face tattoos, an employee may have a religious face tattoo. And so they need to be able to tell HR, this is why I have this tattoo. I need an accommodation from your policy. And of course, don't draft a policy that's going to violate Crown. We already kind of went over this, but it is helpful in the workplace. And part of that is because of the generational divide on what they consider professional, to explain why you have your policy. It could help that employee realize why they need to comply with it or why it's important, versus just, we want you to look like we want you to look. Instead, it's explaining, because you're front facing with customers, this is how we are going to apply company round to make it standard or to show our brand. You should also clearly explain if something is permitted or not. Again, like with the colorful hair, it can be confusing if you just say no colorful hair. Well, can you then, an employee that's brunette, dye their hair yellow or blonde? So some of those considerations is just drafting and making sure it's clear how you draft it. We see some that they say only natural colors. Well, again, can then an employee dye their hair white? Because white's a natural color. And if you apply that differently, then that could be seen as discriminatory with age. Why is the older white male allowed to have white hair, but the younger Black woman cannot dye her hair white. So it's when drafting those policies, just being really careful of what they say and then also how they're applied. This is, again, just kind of what to consider with tattoos, how you're applying it, if there are differences in like the hair situation. Sometimes it can be on a case-by-case basis. You can say, hey, if you have tattoos, let's talk about it, instead of no tattoos at all. And then also the consequence. So if the consequences, including that in the policy of, hey, we're going to send you home for that day to change, or just cover it up, or for the rest of the day, ensure that you don't have, we're not going to put you on camera, or no customer facing for the day. It's one thing to implement a policy and to draft it, and then another to know that your managers are implementing it correctly. A lot of times, if a policy is just there, managers do still also need some guidance of how do I apply this. And so talking them through that, telling them, hey, if you're being too strict with this policy, if you're creating kind of your own thoughts on how it should be applied, that could be discriminatory, and it also could result in people not wanting to hear. Like I said, some generations just view professionalism as differently. And so if one manager is saying, for me and my team, you all must wear heels or something like that, it may just want people to say, I don't want to work here. So working through with managers about the application of that, and also advise them that it can trigger certain laws like tattoos. If it says no tattoos, and then it says, here's where to ask, you reminding the managers, hey, there are some exceptions like religion. And so if they come to you and you're not sure, bring it up to HR and we'll address it with them. And then of course, the possibility of negative publicity, as we especially saw with masks and different dresses, this can be kind of a hot topic. So looking at drafting appearance policies and some of those limitations, keep in mind that your policy could get out, or being able to defend it.
All right, so now it's more legal updates. We know about non-competes, right? At least if you've been paying attention at all, right, with the onslaught of everything that's coming down, non-competes are a real hot topic. And so how do we get to where we're at regarding the war on non-competes? Well, I blame this guy. Anybody know who this guy is? Jimmy John. Why? Why is Jimmy John where we're at today? Because Jimmy John decided that he wanted non-compete provisions for his sandwich makers. Believe it or not. Yes, if you were a Jimmy John's employee, this was what you had to sign. I don't know if you, hold on, let me throw it up there. This basically sets a 2-year, 3-mile radius restriction on your ability to be employed as an owner, partner, investor, employee, etc., of any business which derives more than 10% of its revenue from selling submarine, hero-type, deli-style, pita, and or wrapped or rolled sandwiches, right? So if you were a sandwich maker at Jimmy John's, and I don't think there's any protected information, right? Because they make their sandwiches right in front of you. So it's not secret, right? They have their ingredients on the wall, Hellmann's mayonnaise, so we know what they use, right? So, but if you're at a Jimmy John's, so then Illinois, the state of Illinois really went to war on this, and it was a big deal in like 2013, 14, and 15 that Jimmy John's employees were signing these non-competes because they're making minimum wage, and now they're prohibited from going out and working at any other sandwich shop. So guess who gets involved? This guy. Anybody know who this guy is? That's Joe Biden with a mullet. And if you're keeping track, we've now worked in Urban Dictionary, thank you Heidi, and presidents with mullets into a CLE. So, and if you haven't Googled presidents with mullets, do it, because Bill Clinton with a mullet, Abe Lincoln with a mullet, there's a lot of good ones out there, okay? So this is Joe Biden without the mullet. So in 2015, 2016, Joe Biden decides, as vice president, he is going to start a mission. And his mission is to wage war on non-competes. And it's largely because of low income and middle income wage earners that were being forced to sign non-competes when they were hired most of the time. So he has a letter that goes out that basically says, hey, you shouldn't be able to have controlled where you can go to work. We want employee mobility. And he starts as part of his vice presidential process, he starts a survey. How have non-competes and wage collusion affected you? And you could get onto the website, and you could fill out the form and tell Vice President Biden how non-competes have affected you, your family, your ability to earn a living, your employee mobility, and your salary or your pay as well. So then we get, in 2016, we get a White House report on non-competes. And so just to summarize, you can see in 2016, sort of as the last breath of a two-term presidency, we had a lot come out on non-competes, including sort of a standardization of a Trade Secrets Act, right? There were 48 states at the time that had a Trade Secrets Act themselves. So this was passed through Congress, the Defend Trade Secrets Act in 2016, and it basically revolutionized and made uniform one Trade Secrets Act across the United States, which I think is what is being done today, right? So we have President Biden in office, and we know that he's not a huge fan of Jimmy John or his non-competes, and we know that he's also not a fan of low and middle age or middle income wage earners signing non-competes. And so the Federal Trade Commission proposed a ban on non-compete agreements. You guys have probably heard about that. It came out, there was a whole rulemaking process, and basically they came out with this proposed rule that says non-competes are not going to fly, with no exceptions. And as a matter of fact, if it looks like, smells like a non-compete, even if it's called something else, it's still bad, and we're gonna knock it down. They held a public, or if it smells like a duck. That was good timing. They held a public forum, which you could come and give feedback to the FTC's proposed rule. And there was a surprising balance. It wasn't just everyone came out against or came out in favor of the ban. There was a pretty good balance. But the comment period closed in April. We're still waiting on the final rule. Meanwhile, in Congress, we have a couple different acts. The Workforce Mobility Act of 2023. You'll find that there's also a Workforce Mobility Act of 2016 and 2018 and 2019. Every year they try this, which basically is going to be a codification of non-competes as an unfair trade practice. So at the same time we have these administrative agencies that are trying to make these rules, we also have a ban on non-competes that's winding its way through Congress. In addition to that, we have the Freedom to Compete Act of 2023, which is actually co-sponsored by Senator Rubio and Senator Hassan of New Hampshire. So it's sort of a bipartisan effort to target non-competes as well. And just like the ADEA that we covered, right, this is going to be a part of the Fair Labor Standards Act, which is kind of weird, but it's going to be in there. They say that that non-competes would not fly except if you're an exempt employee under the Fair Labor Standards Act and you enjoy the executive, administrative, or professional exemptions. Then you can have non-compete for those individuals. But for any other exemption, that would not apply. So they've sort of married it up to what would in theory be low and middle income wage earners. Now, as of May 30th, the National Labor Relations Board came out and they said, okay, FTC, hold my beer, I think we can do better. And in my view, as the NLRB General Counsel, non-compete provisions are unlawful. And so we, like the FTC, are going to start looking for non-compete agreements, and we might hold you as a company accountable by filing an unfair labor practice charge against your organization, because they violate you as an employee, your right to do certain things in the workplace regarding your wages, hours, or working conditions. So what's changed in Nebraska regarding non-competes? Nothing, despite all that. Additional developments. Caitlin, you're up.
All right, sorry, I should turn this on earlier. A few years ago, federal law was passed that ended forced arbitrations of sexual assault and sexual harassment in the workplace. So previously, if you had an arbitration agreement and it would cover a sex harassment claim, that employee could be forced to go into arbitration. There was a bill passed that really was sparked from the Me Too movement, saying that these individuals that suffered sexual harassment in the workplace should be able to go to court. Again, there are some jury waivers, and how that plays out in states differs, but the movement to end forced arbitration for sex harassment has spurred other protected classes to want the same. So last month, Representatives Hank Johnson and Cory Booker introduced the Ending Forced Arbitration of Race Discrimination Act. It's still pending, and it's going to have a steep battle to be passed. But the idea is that, like sex harassment claims, race discrimination claims, those employees or former employees should be able to go to court and hear that claim. One of the reasonings for this was because arbitration is very historically a white male dominated, for arbitrators is very generally white males. And so the part of the thought was that these individuals should have the opportunity of their peers to hear those claims. We are also seeing movement of this in the age discrimination claims. It's not the same considerations. I would say a lot of arbitrators are more seasoned or can be older, but we are seeing that come up as something to keep an eye out on. Garnishment updates. This is more just fun. Ken and I did a big case of garnishments, so we keep an eye out on it. I don't know how often you work with garnishments, but in Nebraska, employer has 10 days from the day they're served the garnishment to file a response to those garnishment interrogatories. And that is the 10 days to have the court file stamp the interrogatory answers. Not 10 days to mail it, but 10 days for the court to receive it. This is a really short turnaround, especially for companies that don't work with garnishments frequently. A lot of times they don't know how to answer them. They have to find out. Or another big issue with Nebraska garnishments is that the person that sends the garnishment doesn't need to send it to the company's legal service representative. Instead, they can just send it anywhere in the company. A lot of times this means that some manager, like for example, a gas station, instead of sending it where legal service might need to be sent, it's just sent to the gas station that employee works. It's received by a manager who doesn't know what it is, puts it in their desk, forgets about it for 8 days. And so in Nebraska, there's been legislation introduced last year. It did fail, but we are seeing more movement on it to try to ensure that garnishments are sent where legal service must be sent, so that there is one stream of receiving it. So there's not the issue of just random managers getting it, not knowing what it is, and setting it aside.
All right, and last but not least, we promised AI, so we're going to tackle AI. Well, AI can do about anything. I don't know if you guys have seen some of the fun pictures that you can type in and say, hey, AI, give me a picture of the Pope in a coat. And then you get a picture of the Pope in a coat. These are all AI generated, by the way. Give me a picture of Donald Trump wrestling with the police, and you get a picture of Donald Trump wrestling with the police. Give me a picture of Joe Biden in a mullet, right? So AI can do about anything. That's what we're finding out. In May, the Hollywood writers went on strike because they're concerned, because they were negotiating a new collective bargaining agreement. They hadn't gone on strike in 15 years, but they're concerned that what what producing companies will do is take all of their previous material, feed it into AI, and come out with scripts for new movies, scripts with new sitcoms, scripts for new dramas. So they went on strike because they wanted to weave something into their collective bargaining agreements that's going to prevent these production companies from doing that. We're seeing voice cloning by AI. And then we get into the fun stuff, legal research by AI, right? Briefs or opinions by AI. So has anyone been following the New York folks that are in trouble with, because it's this poor 27-year-old, not year old, 27-year practicing veteran attorney in New York. And he's on the plaintiff's side, filed a case, and the defense filed a motion to dismiss, okay? The plaintiff's attorney then files an opposition to the motion to dismiss. And then in the reply brief filed by the defense attorneys, they said, hey, we can't find 6 of the cases that you cited in your brief. And so the court weighs in and said, you know what? I can't find it either. Attorney, you need to provide those cases to the court. So the attorney files an affidavit with the court, attaches the 2 cases and excerpts from the other 4, and says, here you go. The court says, I still can't find these cases. And the attorney looks at and issues an order to show cause, right? And that causes all of our stomachs to drop if you get an order to show cause filed against you. And the attorney files an affidavit that says the citations and opinions in question were provided by ChatGPT. So all of these opinions that were attached to this guy's affidavit were provided to him by ChatGPT. And it said the ChatGPT assured me that it was reliable, right? And we've talked about this already, right? How ChatGPT wants to please, AI wants to please. And so this is what this guy attached to his affidavit. He said, this was my chat with ChatGPT. I asked ChatGPT, is Varkeyze a real case? And ChatGPT says, yes, it is. And then I asked ChatGPT, what's your source? And ChatGPT says, I apologize for the confusion earlier. Upon double checking, I found that the case does indeed exist and can be found on legal research databases such as Westlaw and LexisNexis. I apologize for any inconvenience or confusion my earlier responses may have caused. This is like finding your kid has done something bad and they're just doubling down, right? You can see the way this is going. And then he says, are the other cases you provided fake? He's asking this of AI. And what does AI say? Nope. The other cases I provided are real and can be found in reputable legal databases such as LexisNexis and Westlaw. This was attached to this guy's affidavit. Well, the court said, well, now you're going to have to show cause as to why you shouldn't be sanctioned, because you basically went back to ChatGPT and you asked it to verify that what it previously provided was wrong. So then this guy files an affidavit at the end of, I think it was on like June 2nd, and then there was a hearing on June 8th. A sanctions hearing. And it turns out that this guy basically asked ChatGPT to draft a brief for him, and which it did, and it provided all these citations. And the sanctions motion is just out there pending right now, so keep an eye out for that. And then maybe on the heels of that, you guys know Nick Creitelli over in Iowa. He's sort of on the forefront. He puts out an email last week with an ethics warning that says, do not use ChatGPT or other AI platforms as legal research tools, because it will constantly spit out fake cases. And so then, and don't put any attorney-client or confidential information in the query, right? Because it will take that and use it in further ChatGPT or AI-generated responses. And check your judges' preferences, because what we're also seeing is different judges now are coming out and saying, hey, look, if you use AI, you need to darn well certify that that you've double checked this and it's right. So what's interesting to me is they're not saying don't use it. They're saying, hey, verify that the content has been checked for accuracy by a human being. So it seems like there's a little bit of an acceptance to doing this, and there's AI. So we're still a little 156. That's not bad since we started a little late. We're happy to stick around for any questions, but I know you guys want to get to the break too. So thank you guys very much, and have a great rest of the afternoon.
going to go ahead and get started. I'm Amber Roberts, and I am very excited to be here with you today. It was, we were wanting to cover this topic on generational differences and had another speaker in mind for it, but he has since retired and decided that he didn't want to do it. But I had seen him do the presentation a couple different times, and this is a topic that I find incredibly fascinating. So whether it was smart or not, I raised my hand and said I would do it. So we'll see at the end of the presentation whether you guys think that was a good idea or not. Also today, it's very interesting, the previous two presentations, the panel plus the last one that we had, it was like it was meant to be. They're all going to feed in to what we're going to talk about today. So I am wearing pantyhose. I hate pantyhose, so you're welcome, people. I think we should decide from now on, though, that pantyhose should be banned. They should not exist. They are the bane of my existence. I changed my shoes. I was in flats. I'm in heels now. And as soon as this presentation is over, I will be changing back to my flats. But no, so we definitely different generational changes and the way that generations view things. So I'm Amber Roberts. I have been a longtime member of NePA, former past president, and super excited to be here and have been involved in our diversity event since the beginning. And we think that these topics are very interesting, but also necessary. They're crucial that we're bringing these topics up and we're discussing them, opening conversations up about them. So today we're going to talk about generational differences, understanding and overcoming stereotypes. Here's the different things that we're going to talk about. Oh, and to be entirely transparent, I use ChatGPT to help me with my presentation. Because I think that it's fun to put it out there and see what it is. However, I fact check things. So we should be good there. But it was very useful in creating the outline for what you guys are going to see today, as well as we're going to have some humor on how ChatGPT describes workers of different generations, which was very interesting and funny, I thought. So hopefully you'll get a giggle out of those as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about why we have these conflicts between generations. We're going to talk about things that explain societal change, because it's not just generational cohorts that do it. We're also going to go through some important events. So it was in the first panel, they talked about some key events that had influenced them in the law. So some of those are on the list, as well as some other ones that you'll recognize. Then we're going to go into the actual generational cohorts. So we spent a good chunk of time talking about the different ones, but we're definitely going to focus on those a little bit more, as well as their characteristics, communication styles that we've touched on today. And then kind of bridging the gap and how we can overcome those and really flip those into becoming advantages for us. So why is generational diversity important? Why is diversity of any nature important, and how do we take advantage of that? So generational diversity relates to age groups, right? Whether within society or the workplace. It talks about why these differences, they're very distinct characteristics that we have. We also have to remember, however, that there are individuals within these cohorts, right? So you're never going to find somebody that is 100% agrees with all of these, characteristics that they have, or that the stereotypes are true of them. So for me in particular, I'm Gen Y, a millennial. I'm the first year of millennials, and I identify a lot with Gen X. So even though I'm a Gen Y, a lot of the stuff when we're talking about, it's like, nah, it's not the me generation for me. I'm up here with these guys. So we have to make sure that we're taking into account the individual nature of people and making sure that we are working with them on an individual basis. And then understanding and managing generational differences, why that's crucial, right? Why do we need to do that? Why do we need to understand the way that people think and the way that they prefer to be communicated with? And it's really to enhance collaboration and be more effective in the workplace. Okay, a little humor. So if you go out and you do a search for generational humor, you get lots of these things. We'll get into some of the memes that are out there specific to the generations, a lot of the negative ones, but within about 10 seconds, you're going to have thousands of these, and I got a real good giggle out of a lot of these. In particular, the 2019, hey son, I found a picture of your grandpa, and then 2060. This is what the picture of your grandpa looks like. I think that's pretty funny. Okay, so let's talk about why there's conflict in between the generations. Who's heard of clickbait? Everybody, right? We've all heard of clickbait. No, haven't heard of clickbait? So clickbait is things that try and get you to click, right? So they're things that are inflammatory to say, oh, I really want to know more about that, or I can't believe that's true, so I'm going to click on it. And they pay no attention to what the actual facts or data are, right? And in particular, what I found very interesting on these is that when you read the actual story itself, it's frequently contrary to what the title is. Like the title is there to get you to click on it, and then once you do, it's the complete opposite. And so you're like, okay, well, that's not good. But then you also sit and think about things that are shared on social media. So how many people have shared things or seen other people share things without reading the article? They share it based on the title. And they're like, well, this is very inflammatory. I must share this. I absolutely agree with this position. And then you read the article, and there's things in the comments going, did you even read that? That didn't say what you thought it said. Or there's and so it also simplifies the narrative. So it takes things that are very complex, things that are very, have varying degrees of truth to them, and simplifies it down into, do millennials even eat food? Well, I would assume they do. We're still all here. And so they have those different things. And then we have things like the me generation from Time, right? A trusted source, some would say. And yet they're simplifying it down to a stereotype. So another reason that there is conflict is there is an entire industry out there that makes millions of dollars on this conflict. And companies will spend, how many times have you guys seen, or have you seen in the news where they're like, we need to hire experts on millennials because we just don't understand them. In the past 10 to 15 years, we don't understand these millennials. If we want to recruit them and retain them, we need to have an expert and consultants, and they want ping pong tables. There's an entire industry based around this. Go out to LinkedIn, do a search for millennial expert or Gen Z expert. There's one on here, helping budding founders and creatives release subconscious limiting beliefs. Career Plus mindset coach, speaker, Gen Z and millennial expert. So there is an entire industry around this, and you bet that they make money off conflict and off saying that, well, millennials are so different, or Gen Z is so different that you need an expert. Another one, we have false expectations and divides. So because people are being inflammatory, we get things like a generation of sociopaths, how the baby boomers betrayed America. I mean, I don't know what the book says exactly, I haven't read it, but I'm pretty sure that it's blaming people for things that aren't necessarily their fault. And I also, in all of these articles that you read that are inflammatory like this, I have yet to see anybody say, it's all their fault, but here's how we fix it. There's none of that. It's just, it's their fault. So then you say, okay, well, it's their fault. I'm going to point fingers. Well, no. It's their fault, but there's no solutions or collaboration working together. So conflict. And then we even had this earlier today on the panel. Some proclaim that only the young people can save the world, and they ignore the value of other generations. So earlier, when John said, he asked how his granddaughter, right? He asked her, well, how does that work? And she goes, you don't need to know. Maybe he does need to know. Maybe it would be good to know. Maybe we need to take into account that there's still value in him understanding. But you don't need to know. How many times do we do that, or do we see that where we're like, oh, you're too old to understand that, so I'm just going to do it for you, instead of having them understand what's going on. And if they did understand what was going on, could they provide another viewpoint that would be of value? So some other ones on here, Gen Z party poopers have ruined after-work drinks. Like, well, that's interesting. I know plenty of Gen Z people who love after-work drinks. And then, yeah, the need to keep Gen Z workers happy, hire a generational consultant, right? Like it's very interesting, all these conflicts, and when you start going through them. Okay, so we touched on this earlier in a couple different ways on there are 3 effects that can explain all change in society. And we like to blame things or explain things that they're generational, but they're really not necessarily. So one thing, and they touched on it in the early panel, is that there are life cycle effects. So it's not what generation you are, it's how old you are. So typically when you're younger, you are more likely to be okay with change, to be okay with taking risks. And as you get older, typically you become more risk adverse. And so it's not that the baby boomers don't like change, it's that they are older. And people who are older typically become more resistant to change because they're because they don't like risk as much. So that's not a generational thing. When we look back, who was the one fighting for the civil rights movement? Baby boomers. Would you say that that would constitute that they don't like change? I mean, if they're out there fighting for it, I would say, no, they're okay with change. But now, maybe it's because of their age and not because of their generation. Period effects. So these are things that everyone's affected by. The pandemic, COVID-19, huge example of that, right? Whether it's national or global, these are things that affect everyone, but they may affect them differently based on the age that they were when it happened. So if it happened when you were in your early career, so we had one on the panel, our Gen Z from the panel today, he said, well, COVID-19 hit right when I was starting law school. And so I transitioned from in class to everything virtual. Do you think that that's going to affect him moving forward throughout his life? Probably. So war, economic crisis, the Great Recession is a good example of this. The war in Ukraine, World War II. Any of those things are real good examples of things that affected everyone. 9/11, it's a real good one. And then we have the cohort effects. So those are the generational effects. And those are things where each new generation is different than the others, but it's not because of their age. At that same age, they would be inherently different. And they're going to stay different throughout. So how many people grew up going to restaurants where there was smoking? And you would walk through the smoking section to get to the non-smoking section, which I always found really, really funny. How many people in here don't remember that? No, raise it high, raise it proud. How many people don't remember smoking in restaurants? Do you think that that is a difference? Do you think that that affects how you interact potentially with the world? I think it does. Mental health disorders. So there is still stigma around mental health disorders. However, we are seeing more and more on social media and other avenues where people are standing up and saying, I'm depressed and I need help. I have anxiety and I need help. I'm going to therapy. You should too. Because let's be honest, we probably all should be in therapy. But so that kind of a stigma when you were in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, even the 90s, there was a lot of stigma around, we don't talk about that. You don't need therapy. Your family can handle it. We'll just hug you a little harder. So there's a massive difference now in people able to get help, people able to be open to not feeling like they are alone from what was experienced a long time ago. So I think that that will go through, and that's a generational difference that we're going to see that impacts into the future. Another one that was a good example I thought was the probability of owning your own home. So baby boomers, even the silent generation that had so many hardships, when a lot of them came back from World War II, there was a boom and they were able to, especially veterans, certain veterans, I should say, were able to get loans at a reduced rate to help them buy homes, or to help them, get ahead or do different things. And so there was a boom that occurred. And now, if you talk to later millennials or to Gen Z, most of them, or a lot of them, do not see that they will be owning a home anytime soon. Especially not now, with the market the way it is, and the increase in home prices and inflation and the cost of food. Owning a home for them is kind of a pipe dream for a lot of them. I know my brother and his wife, that's a big thing. And it's not necessarily, they are shifting attitudes a lot of times away from that, where that's not necessarily seen as a status thing anymore, because they're like, well, it's never gonna happen. I'm never gonna pay off this student loan, can't afford a house. And so it's a generational change there. Forgot to mention, these slides will be available after the presentation, and if you guys have any questions during, please feel free to raise your hand. Okay, let's talk a little bit about some important events that may have shaped the generations. So we've got things like women's suffrage, the Great Depression, World War II, Rosa Parks and Civil Rights Act, assassinations, the moon landing, Roe versus Wade, both being put out there and then recently being overturned. Dolly the sheep being cloned. How many people remember that one? 9/11, huge one. Facebook, when that was founded. The iPhone. Interracial marriage, same-sex marriage. Climate change, wildfires, the resurgence of the Me Too movement. SpaceX. These are all things that when we start taking them from the lens of the generations, we start to understand why the generations have the characteristics that they do. Okay, so we've seen this. The ages on these, vary, but typically these are the ages that are from the cohort. So we do have some generational cohorts prior to traditionalists, but they're not in the workforce for the most part. Although I did read a story about like a 100-year-old lady that had just retired. I plan to retire way before then. And then the different names, right? So millennials, Zoomers, and then the newest generation, which is rightly, for right now anyways, being tagged Generation Alpha that we have out there. Okay, so let's talk about the traditionalist, the silent generation. These are the movies and the key events, some of the key events that would have shaped them. What are some negative stereotypes that we've heard about the silent generation? Throw them out there. The silent generation has no negative stereotypes. I will say they're the ones with the least. What about penny pinchers? I mean, that's the number one that I can think of. Why do we think that they're called penny pinchers? Does anything on this slide indicate why they would be called penny pinchers? So let's say that you're born in 1925, 1929 comes along, Great Depression. Everything's great, and then all of a sudden, people are losing jobs, they don't have enough money for food, and it's a 10-year thing. Do you think that's going to shape how you interact with the world? Those are their formative years, and they're like, sorry, we can't afford that, we can barely afford to eat. We have to scrape our pennies together. Okay, then they get done with that, and then guess what happens? World War II, where the government, the authority, is telling you you can only be a good citizen if you're rationing. Does that change your worldview and how you? I'd say so. So when we start to look at it through the lens of different world things that affect a generation, we understand where some of those stereotypes come and start showing themselves. When we understand where stereotypes and characteristics of a generation come from, we can have a little more empathy for them. We're like, well, of course that makes sense. So, resistance to change. Once again, is that, you're gonna see that in the older generations. Is that necessarily a generational cohort? After what we talked about, it's more likely that that's a life age one. Conservative values, preference for traditional industries. I wonder why there's that one. Did the tech industry exist back then? Nope. It was mostly agriculture and factory workers. Some characteristics: strong work ethic and loyalty, respect for authority and hierarchy, thrifty and conservative. These start to make sense when you've got the entire government telling you that you're a good citizen if you do these things. Makes a little sense why we've got these. And then we talked about earlier in the first panel, prefer face-to-face and formal. So for some of them, they didn't have a phone in their house when they were growing up. All right, so here's where ChatGPT comes in, which I thought was really funny. You don't have to read the whole thing, obviously. I'm not going to. But some things that stand out. Dressed in conservative attire, press suit or modest dressed, muted colors, functional and formal. They have a straight posture and are of serious demeanor. They're well-groomed, conservative, modesty and conformity to societal norms. So I want you to remember that, because we're going to see some stark changes as we're going through for the other generations. All right, everybody's favorite, baby boomers. So the memes, like I said, were really fun to find on here, and I think one of the most famous probably now that went viral, okay, boomer. So, key events: civil rights movement, Vietnam War, moon landing. Movies reflect those events. Guess who's coming to dinner? Who's seen that one? Space Odyssey. Makes sense with the moon landing. James Bond came around. Very interesting. And then Star Wars. What are some negative stereotypes of baby boomers? Shout them out. Don't be shy.
Work obsessed.
Workaholics.
Not tech savvy.
Not tech savvy. Anything else? Is that really the only two that we're going to get?
Naggers.
I'm sorry, what?
Naggers.
Naggers. That's a good one. Were your parents baby boomers?
That's what family members that are.
That will be a mom thing too, though.
They tended to be a lot more strict with their children.
Strict with their children. Mm-hmm. I think the older ones of the baby boomers may have been more strict with their children, because like this one says, complain about kids these days and then raised kids these days. Okay, stereotypes: technologically challenged, workaholics. They have traditional values. Once again, resistance to change. That's an age thing. That's not a generational cohort thing. Financially secure and health concerns. So some of these I find interesting. Financially secure. There's a whole, at least, subset of baby boomers now that we're hearing about, that they're like, I'm living on Social Security and I can't afford to do anything, right? So some of these stereotypes don't apply, or don't apply across the board, obviously. Health concerns. Do we think that that one is a generational cohort, or do we think that's a life thing? Life thing. It's an age thing, that one, for the most part. Although, if they were smokers, that could be generational on that one. But some of these characteristics that are here: optimistic and driven, team-oriented and competitive at the same time, and strong interpersonal skills. So these are things that can be positives, right? Strong interpersonal skills. They, like John had mentioned, they were out doing face-to-face meetings, right? So being able to go out and interact with people on a face-to-face basis, that's a good thing. Something that I think in our later generations that we'll talk about a little bit, we've lost. Prefer in-person phone conversations. There was an article I read that was interesting about a dad who worked with his daughter, and he was complaining to her because he would call and then leave a voicemail. And he was irritated that the people he had left a voicemail for would respond via email. And he was like, why won't they just call me back? And his daughter's like, well, Dad, they're a different generation. Email is their preference. And so once he understood that, it was a little better for how he was interacting with the workers. Okay, so another Chat-GPT. I find these just hilarious. Their mature and professional demeanor, business casual, oh, sorry, got the wrong one, hold on. That's Gen X, they're not business casual, baby boomers aren't. Professional appearance, suit or formal attire, that sounds better. Conservative fashion sense, traditional styles and muted colors. Experience, knowledge, and ability to mentor younger employees. So that's something that I think holds true, and something that I found in my own professional experience, that baby boomers have a lot of experience and they are willing to share it with the younger generations. And so taking advantage of that, I think, is key. And that's one of the benefits of having different generations in the workplace, is taking advantage of the experience that you have from the older generations and the different viewpoints that they have. All right, Generation X. Also, we heard this earlier, latchkey kids. So you've got an entire generation that it was not uncommon for them to come from either single parent homes or two worker homes, where they would get home from school and be on their own for 3 or 4 hours. I know some people are laughing. These are pretty funny. Like I told you, I got lots of giggles out of these. But it was not uncommon for them to be on their own. And so when we're seeing some additional characteristics and stereotypes come out of this generation, they make a lot of sense. These are the different movies. And like I said, I identify with Gen X a lot. So these are the movies that Reality Bites in particular is the one I always think of when I think of Gen X. But the millennials are yelling at the boomers. They're yelling at each other. Gen Z's over here crying. And Gen X is just watching the show go on. I also think it's interesting that Gen X, a lot of times they are described, or they feel like the middle child, the forgotten ones. And I think that holds true. What are some negative stereotypes about Gen X?
Can't think of one.
That's a Gen X for you right there. That's all right. Because your generation's the best, right? Obviously. Figure it out. They're just like, we had to figure it out ourselves. You figure it out yourselves. Mm-hmm. That's one. What's another one?
They're helicopter parents.
Helicopter parents. Absolutely, they can be, for sure.
Because we were left alone for so long.
That's absolutely true. So what you see if you look at the research too, is that the generations, how they were raised, they were like, well, I didn't like how I was raised, so I'm going to do it different. And then they do it different, and then that generation says, well, I don't like how I was raised, so they're going to do it different. And so that's why a lot of times grandparents and grandkids get along real well, because they share values, because they were both raised the same. So you'll see generational skips where, okay, that's why I get along with my grandparents but not my parents, because there's a switch frequently in that. We're always trying to do better, and then we end up making the same mistakes that were made a couple generations ago. Slackers is another one. Lazy, indifferent, cynical. Got some Gen X people who are going, I'm not cynical. They also, as they talked about earlier today, they're adaptable, very flexible, because they had to be. They're the generation that didn't start out with technology, and then technology showed up. And they were like, well, okay, I'm either going to figure this out or I'm not working. Very independent, self-reliant. They definitely embrace work-life balance. So it's something that as they were starting their careers, they had noticed that their parents didn't have that work-life balance. And it could have been because they were in single-parent homes or two-parent homes, or sometimes they were working multiple jobs and their parents weren't home with them. And so they're like, well, I'm going to be a helicopter parent. I'm going to be right there with my kid. I'm going to be home and able to go to all of their school events Adaptable, resourceful. Tolerance is something that I think is very interesting. So over here, when you got them, they're just watching the show. It's because they don't have a dog in the fight. They're just like, it's fine. It'll work out. Communication style. So definitely comfortable with email, but they prefer digital or in person, right? They can do both. All right, so here we go. Here's the Gen X worker description. This is where we start getting to business casual attire, stylish yet conservative, adapted to the digital age, confidence and relaxed demeanor, mix of traditional and modern elements. So this is where we're starting to see a shift to a more casual and relaxed environment. ChatGPT is really funny though if you look at this. So. And then I think it's funny at the bottom, outside of work, a Generation X worker may have diverse interests and hobbies. These can range from music, movies, and literature from their youth. And it's like, is that not every generation? Of course, I think that's a human. That's not a Generation X worker, but ChatGPT, gotta love it. All right, millennials. Where's my millennials at? Oh, millennials. Quite a few of you in here. How many of you millennials identify as Gen X? So key events, internet, digital revolution, 9/11. We were coming of age when 9/11 really hit. Recession, the Great Recession. So a lot of Gen Y, the millennials, were coming out and trying to get jobs, and the recession hit. And so being able to get a job wasn't as easy as what it was touted to be when we went to college. I'm on the top level there, so I wasn't affected by that part, but a lot of the ones in the middle, in the later part of millennials, were affected by that. So movies, Clueless, classic, Matrix. Now, what are some stereotypes of the millennials? No work ethic. Entitled. Well, yeah, right. The sense of entitlement is strong with this one. What else? Millennials got way more than that.
15-second attention span.
No attention span, can't focus.
Everyone gets a trophy.
I mean, it had to be said.
Microwave personality,
Everything quick? Yep. I want it now. How about job hopper?
Yeah.
No work ethic. So some of these we do get positive. Tech savvy, I'd say that's a positive one. Lazy or unmotivated. Entitled. Financially burdened. A couple of the other, and this one too, which I think is very interesting. Lack of interpersonal skills, which frequently leads to being lonely and depressed. So there's that mental health thing coming through again. And it's not that it wasn't in the other generations. It's just now it's being brought to the forefront a little bit more. I also think, so this is the first time that we're seeing socially conscious. So characteristics, tech savvy, connected. Here's something that's interesting when you're working with millennials, a desire for purposeful work and feedback. It's the reason that we are job hopping, or some people are job hopping, is because they're not feeling connected. They don't feel that there's purposeful work, and so they're going to find purposeful work. So instead of sticking with a company that doesn't resonate with them, they're going to go find one that does. Especially when we have, where we've seen a lack of loyalty with a lot of companies towards their employees. The employer's like, well, or the employee's like, they're not loyal to me. I'm going to go find somebody that either is, or at least that I resonate with. So we also prefer digital. We can handle it all: email, instant messaging, social media. And I will say that, in the 80s, I wasn't raised, like the cell phones showed up in like 1998, 1999 time frame. Our first personal computer, I was 10 at the time. So I do remember a time, when the phones were on the wall, even the rotary phones, which are really funny. If you ever want to get a good laugh, give it to a Gen Z. Give them a rotary phone. They won't know what to do with it. Okay, millennial worker description. Dressed in comfortable yet stylish manner. Graphic t-shirt with a pop culture reference, which is what I would prefer to be wearing today. Attention to personal style. Typically, you can find them with electronics, including like a laptop. I've got 2 with me today. And then a mix of modern furniture and technology. Open floor plan. So we're starting to see a trend of getting more casual, also paying more attention to personal style, being individualistic, as is what ChatGPT is telling us anyways. All right, Generation Z, Zoomers. How many Zoomers are in here? A few. They're like, I don't want to talk. That's because they would text me the answer if I gave them the option, but they don't want to raise their hand. That's okay. So Gen Z gets a lot of flack too. So on here, talking to somebody in real life, they won't make eye contact, but texting them, that's okay. And then they also get a lot of flack about like sounds. And so like Gen Z is oof or yeet. You guys heard of yeet? We've got to know my gosh over here, yeah. So key events, mobile technology, climate change awareness, the pandemic was heavily affected them and their future, how they view the workplace. Different movies, so we're starting to see more attention to globalization, Slumdog Millionaire, and also things like post-apocalyptic things, Hunger Games. There were quite a few post-apocalyptic movies that have been coming out. Oh, I forgot. Here, let's put it this way. What are stereotypes of Zoomers? Now that you've all seen them, you should be able to throw some out.
Technologically savvy.
Good job. Well done. What else?
Don't like in-person stuff
Mhm.
at all.
Yeah, they prefer to be digital. Healthy boundaries.
On their social media accounts.
Yeah, they have, yeah, so social media is prevalent. They have multiple. It's not like when the millennials came out and they were like, oh, I'll have one Facebook account or MySpace if you're Gen X. They're like, no, let's have every account. And there's 30 billion of them to do. How they remember their passwords, though, I don't. It's easy to reset them, right? That's how we remember them. Okay, so socially conscious, technologically savvy. So these are things from, millennials as well. Entrepreneurial. Why do you think there's that one?
They don't like bosses.
They want to be their own boss. They want to have better work-life balance. So they're going to make their own rules. Short attention span. I like the diverse and inclusive. How many of you guys have seen that the younger generation and even Generation Alpha are more willing to look at other viewpoints, are more willing to accept other viewpoints and talk things through instead of saying, nope, you're wrong. Financially prudent. Why do you think that would be one?
They only work the minimum amount necessary to pay for what they want.
Financial recessions.
Some good dialogue and discussion going on here.
Everything costs more, so they kind of have to.
Yeah.
Costs more. Gen Z maybe, especially the early Gen Zs when they're coming into the workforce, are coming in at a time when the amount that they're getting paid doesn't necessarily reflect the cost of things, right?
More of them living at home longer.
Living at home longer. Mm-hmm.
Student loan burdens maybe for the last 2.
Mm-hmm. Thinking that they're never gonna pay off those stinking student loans. So why try? But we'll see we'll see how it plays out. Flexible and adaptable, I think that's true. So Gen Z is, the pandemic heavily affected them. So my son came out and so he was graduating right at the point from high school when they were shutting everything down. So no prom, no graduation, traditional graduation. And that's going to affect how they go through life. Definitely need to be flexible and adaptable on there. So, characteristics, diverse and inclusive, technologically fluent. This is one that, millennials, when we came on, we adapted to the technology. But Gen Z was one that said from a young age, they had access to the technology and to advanced technology, right? Like it wasn't just a rotary phone. It was a smartphone that they were chewing on when they were 18 months old. They prefer instant messaging and video communication platforms. All right, Zoomer work description. This one's pretty good too. Casual yet stylish attire. They value comfort and individuality in their clothing choices. Here's where we see a variety of hairstyles. Desire for self-expression, authentic. Now here's something that's a little bit different. They're seen as potentially having like no attention span. However, they've got a lot of dedication and focus when it's something that they think is valuable. Young professionals collaborating on projects, motivational quotes or creative artwork on the walls that reflect who they are. And then down below, they want meaningful work. They strive for work-life balance and are driven by purpose and personal growth. That doesn't sound like somebody that lacks attention to me. All right, let's talk about Generation Alpha. So this is my youngest, and it is absolutely true that this one is digital platforms, virtual collaboration. She's never known a time where YouTube and Facebook and Minecraft didn't exist. And so even to the point of this generation, is email going to be a thing for them? Or do they communicate on social platforms like through gaming? They don't need instant message. They may or may not need phones. They're just going to get online on their program, whatever it is, and they'll use that. While they're doing something else, they're chatting with people across the world. They've never known any difference. So emerging technology, AI for them is not going to be new. It's embedded in their stuff. They're going to expect that firms and companies are building that technology in to make it easier for them to do the jobs that they're trying to do. So increasing globalization, they're also subject to a lot of other things, including mass shootings increasing. Being aware of their surroundings. Do they feel safe in environments that should make them feel safe? Is that going to affect how they interact with the world? You bet. Some movies and entertainment. So I had to expand this because I couldn't find any movies that applied specifically that I could say this movie. It's Netflix and other streaming services. That's what they're subjected to. Or that's what they're dealing with, right? TikTok, YouTube, this is how they are interacting with the world. So characteristics, we don't know a lot yet. And so we probably got another 10 years on this generation before we start to see kind of some of the more things being implications that come out of it, but definitely they are digitally native. And the other side of that, tech dependent. Can they operate without technology? I don't know about you, I'm teaching my kids how to read a map. Just in case the zombie apocalypse happens. They need to be able to navigate. Can they get where they need to go? Absolutely. Can they do it if they don't have technology? Absolutely not. I mean, to be honest, I can't either anymore. They do have a global mindset, more diverse perspectives. So when they are interacting with people, they have the ability, and we do too, right now, because of the internet and because of all of the knowledge that is out there, we have the ability to find things out. I think that Generation Alpha is going to be better than we are at determining what is truth versus what is false, because they're growing up with that necessity. To say, okay, I'm not going to act on this until I verify that it's what it needs to be, instead of just reading a title and saying, okay, now I'm going to share this without reading the article. They also have very early exposure to AI and automation, and like I said, they're going to expect that. So those are things that we need to be paying attention to. Definitely comfortable with digital platforms, virtual collaboration. So my youngest, when she entered school, it was all, and for a lot of our young ones, it was virtual. That was their first life experience that they were dealing with from that perspective, from learning. So to them, that is totally normal, totally natural. And even though we are back in person in schools, the technology that's being brought into the schools is huge. You know, so they spend part of their day on tablets, learning from other things, and being able to segment out, you know, okay, well, you're at this level, you're at this level, we're going to meet you where you are, right? Technology is allowing us to do that more and more. So it's very interesting to me to see how they will progress over time. All right, bridging the gap. So we've got a few minutes, then we'll open up for questions if anybody has anything. But these are things that are across diversity. So these should not be too shocking to anyone on here. But we do better as a society when we recognize individuality. So it's much harder to say, okay, boomer, if you know that boomer's name and you know who their kids are and you know why they are doing the things that they are doing. It's much harder to put a stereotype on that. So when we recognize that individuals, while they may have certain generational differences, that if we are avoiding those stereotypes and getting to know the person, then it's much easier to start bridging the gap and start taking advantage of the benefits of having a diverse age workforce. Another one, promote understanding. We need to talk to people. We need to try and figure out why they're interacting the way that they are. So, for instance, the dad that was like, I'm putting voicemails out there, why won't they call me back? When you start understanding that that's not their preference, that they are better when they have a chance to maybe reflect and think about it and put it in an email versus being on the phone. And especially with Gen Z. I don't know about you, but between Gen Z and Generation Alpha, they have anxiety about picking up a telephone. They're like, no, I don't want to call them. I'll send a text. Why is that? Do we understand that that's not them being rude to us? It's not them being informal or not professional. It's them being their authentic self, and that's how they're going to do the best that they can and communicate in the way that they are able to. Flexible communication. So we need to adapt communication styles. So this is one I thought was very interesting with the panel, how John was talking about, they don't recommend sending texts for professional advice, but that could change. And I think absolutely, as we are coming more and more into additional methods, new technologies that we don't even know about yet, we're going to have to adapt to those. And definitely communication and the pandemic, we saw huge jumps and leaps in that, being able to be virtual hearings, right? E-filings, that kind of stuff. So we're going to see more and more of that that we come through, and the companies need to be flexible with it. They also need to stay up to date with it. So this other one, mentoring and reverse mentoring. So we're used to seeing mentoring, and especially baby boomers are very much, in my experience, willing to mentor younger generations. However, I think we also need to look at the flip of that. We need to see that there is value in the younger generations providing their insight and teaching the older generations. There's still a lot to be gained from that. And so definitely we have traditional mentoring programs that are out there, but I think we really need to work on pairings where, and in my experience, when you talk to mentors, they will typically say, I learned just as much from my mentee as I did as a mentor. And so I think we really need to take advantage of that. And then we need to embrace technology. We need to be leveraging digital tools and different platforms to work on communication and collaboration across the generations. So these are things that, like I said, are not new ideas. They're not novel by any means. And any area or company that's working on diverse initiatives, these would be things that they would be working on. But I think it's important to call them out. All right, so Gloria Steinem, this is a quote that I think applies. We need to remember across generations that there is as much to learn as there is to teach. So as older generations, as we get older, as millennials turn into the older generation, we need to remember that the younger generations have value, a lot of value, and we need to be taking advantage of that. And the flip side is the younger generations need to not be saying, well, you don't need to know about that. Don't worry, I'll take care of it. They need to be open to dialogue and understanding that while some people say that the world is only going to be changed by the youth, it'll get changed faster and better, in my opinion, if the youth works with our older generations, if we're collaborative. All right, closing things down. So, generational differences, we had a lot of humor in those today, but they do exist, and they exist because we have unique experiences and historical events that have affected us. And so when we are taking those into consideration, when we are thinking about how we're interacting with people of different generations, if we have that kind of lens that we're looking through, I think that it can absolutely help us to interact more authentically and be open, instead of just saying, oh, well, they're a boomer. Can't get along with them. They'll never understand. They'll never change. Now I'm picking on boomers because I'm a millennial. So. But I think it's also key that we are understanding and managing these generational differences within the workplace to avoid conflict, as well as take advantage of all the things that the benefits that we can get from collaboration and innovation, and making the workplace a more authentic and happy place to be at. So that is all that I have for you today. Like I said, I'm Amber Roberts. That's how you can get a hold of me. Happy to reach out on LinkedIn and connect if you would like that. And if anyone has any questions, I would be happy to take those, or any comments, any other funny memes that anyone else has seen. And if not, we're getting towards the later part of the day, and there should be snacks out there.
I'll let you some snacks.
Good afternoon. Like Amber said with her terrible self, I'm Andrea Bell. I am a member of NePA and I work at Burlington Capital. I'm also on the board, the current president. And so today I have a pleasure of moderating the panel that is going to talk about, can you guys hear me? I feel like that's emerging trends in a post-COVID world. So we have Aaron C. Hall. We have Abigail or Abby Moland over here, Amber Svagel, and Rebecca Perry. So they're going to discuss the various trends we've seen coming out of the pandemic, including upskilling, reskilling, difficulties in hiring and retaining talent, remote hybrid work, second and third career applicants, diversity, flexibility, and automation, and whatever else comes up out of this discussion. So we're going to start. I'm going to have them introduce themselves and tell a little bit about themselves. So Abby, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself, the company you work for, your role in the hiring process, training process?
Sure. Everybody hear me okay? All right. My name is Abby Moland. I'm a lawyer with McGrath North Law Firm. I currently serve on the firm's board of directors. I also oversee human resources, so everything from staff hiring to attorney hiring is something that falls within my bucket of responsibilities. And I'm also the director of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'm excited to be here to listen to some other perspectives and share some successes and not so successes that we've had at McGrath North.
All right. Can you guys hear me? Is that on? Okay, got it. Okay, my name is Amber Svagel, and I'm the director of the talent acquisition team at Mutual of Omaha. So I oversee the hiring for everything from the C-suite to our call centers. I've been with Mutual for about 8 years now, and prior to that, I worked at Universal Orlando Resort in Orlando, Florida for 15 years, doing staffing and learning and development. So everybody probably wants to know why I'm here. It's a family thing and what we call a boomerang in the staffing business. I moved away when I was done with school and came back to raise my family here. So awesome. Aaron.
need to move this, or can you hear me? I'm Erin Seahall, and I'm with Legal Aid of Nebraska. My title is Chief of Business Administration, but I help manage most of the administrative functions. So if it's not legal work and it's not fundraising, then I kind of help oversee human resources, finance, IT, building operations, things like that. And we are a statewide nonprofit civil litigation law firm. And my background, I've worked in human resources for a little over 20 years, but I did take a break and went to law school. I'm not a practicing attorney, but it's a great fit for me to be a legal aid.
And Rebecca.
Hi there, I'm Rebecca Perry, and I'm with T-Tech Rock, and I've been there for 13 years. I'm currently an HR generalist, and we have 19 different offices, and so I support staff hiring as well as our nationwide accounting, records, et cetera, hiring. And then I do some help with like employee relations, comp, et cetera.
Great. Okay, so earlier there was a lot of talk about the pandemic and and how that changed things. During that, a whole lot of things changed where there were massive layoffs and then a big frenzy to start hiring people again. How do you think that affected the legal community here in Omaha, the whole pandemic with staffing?
Okay, I guess I'll start. So from McGrath North, we're we have about 120 attorneys and staff at our law firm. And I think from our perspective, we were a little bit insulated, isolated from all the huge shifts and changes in hiring that went on in the broader market and maybe in some of our bigger clients. What I failed to mention at the outset was that I'm a labor and employment attorney as well. So I have a lot of exposure to small clients, larger clients in, that have really a national presence. So I did get kind of the broad exposure to different ways that clients and different businesses were dealing with the pandemic. I think in Omaha, we were more insulated. We did have a lot of, I think we saw a lot of smaller firms in the community that put a lot of people on furlough for a period of time during the pandemic, and took advantage of some of the increased unemployment opportunities available to employees in the state of Nebraska. But as far as the big shifts in hiring and layoffs, I think we were more insulated from that, and we didn't see a whole lot of it from our perspective during the pandemic. And so I think that's been a good thing because it's been stability for us in the market. Although we've continued to, I think, see a really sort of a lack of candidates. The workload has sustained, but we are still struggling to find qualified candidates for a number of openings. I know we're not alone. Just if you look at any of the job postings out there today, we're kind of all in the same boat. So I view that as a good thing for our market, that the business is up, but and the conditions have stabilized as far as employment is concerned.
What about your experience, Amber?
Very similar. I think things have been fairly stable for us at Mutual of Omaha. We have a very long tenured workforce at Mutual, and luckily we didn't experience any layoffs or anything like that during the pandemic crisis. We did see a huge reduction in our rec to fills. So my team that usually is recruiting actually went out in the business, and we started kind of what we call the talent share program, where some of the areas that got a little slower actually shifted their labor to some of the departments that needed assistance, and we cross-trained and tried to maximize the staff that we had. But being a mutual company, we're very lucky. We don't have to react to the, stockholder, call to action. And so we were able to kind of take our time and really assess the situation, and didn't have any like implications from that standpoint. Now, I'd say opposite of what she said, we are actually doing very well with applicants for our positions, because we're still hiring remotely, and that makes a huge difference in your candidate pools. So Mutual is kind of we have a remote, hybrid, and an office work available, and the hiring manager kind of makes the decision based on the role, what that position needs to be. But like all our call centers right now and such are remote. Our law operation comes together in the office like 1 day or 2 days a week. But other than that is remote. So it's a huge perk, and it opened up a national audience for us for hiring talent, which was great.
During the height of the pandemic, so 2020, we did. Oh yeah. During the height of the pandemic, so 2020, I feel like we definitely put a pause on our recruiting. We wanted to see what our client, everything was gonna pan out. And we luckily didn't have to do any layoffs. But I think we were part of the group that, in 2022, all of a sudden we realized the work is still there and we have a lot of positions to backfill. And so we were definitely part of that hiring frenzy that a lot of companies were also involved in. And yeah, we had a lot of the same issues trying to find applicants. It kind of depended on the position. And kind of like the last panelist had mentioned, one of the nice things, especially in our national roles, pre-pandemic, we thought that your staff had to be working in the same department, the same office as their supervisor. And now we're realizing, even in our HR, our library, that we can start to post these positions and wherever we have an office and see what kind of applicants we're getting. So that did kind of help rebound a little bit, depending on the market and position. We could often find where an applicant where previously it would have been an Omaha only applicant.
So our situation is a little bit different because we are a nonprofit, and so we rely heavily on funders, and that really factors into our hiring practices. But because of the pandemic, of course, our client base, the need really rose, and there was a lot of funding between late 2020 through last year, really. And so we grew by about 10%. And we had quite a few positions that were open and that we filled. We're being very mindful now because some of that funding is either decreasing significantly or going away. And we kept that in mind as we were growing, to not grow too much that we got to a point where we were not able to sustain those positions. And so I would say we're not necessarily in a stage of growth right now. We're kind of staying stable, which is necessary for looking at funding moving forward. But we do have, we have hiring challenges kind of no matter what. And so I definitely have seen, especially in the positions that we have posted this year, a decrease in the number of applicants, and positions are getting harder and harder to fill, especially in our outer, it's very hard to find an attorney in Scottsbluff.
Yes. So Abby, you mentioned that you had difficulty, your company did, in finding applicants. For those that were applying, what were kind of some of the things the applicants were looking for to like seal the deal, to like say, okay, I'll take it?
From a staff hiring perspective, we have had a lot of interest in fully remote opportunities, fully, hybrid situations. I think one of the challenges that we faced on the staff side is a lot of our things are, paper filings, that sort of thing requires sort of an in-person presence, especially when you consider some of the demographic of lawyers who, may not be as receptive to technology in their practice, and may require somebody in person to print out documents for them to sign. As opposed to some of our newer lawyers or more technologically savvy lawyers who, will put an electronic signature on just about everything. And so from the staff side, we've had a lot of remote interest. On the attorney side, it's been a little bit interesting. I think at the outset of the pandemic, everyone sort of had this aha moment that remote work was
something new, that everybody wanted, that was really kind of freeing for a lot of people. And what it demonstrated for our firm was we could do it, right? And something that a lot of companies and firms resisted for so long, all of a sudden became, sort of overnight, something you had to do in order to stay in business. And we've thrived in implementing that for our staff and lawyers. The one sort of new thing that we've realized is that with some of our openings, we've received a lot of applicants that are in fully remote jobs, or applicants that are in situations where they don't go into the office anymore, or they go in one day a week. And some people really want more of a connection with the people that they work with, especially if they're new to the workforce or they're new lawyers. They really want that in-person training opportunity, mentoring, and they aren't as excited about the 5 days a week in your basement with pure silence and the ability to crank out work that some of us really find pleasant. And so that's been kind of a new shift for us, in realizing that there really is still a market for people that want those training opportunities. And we've gotten a lot of lawyers interested in moving firms, both in Omaha and outside of Omaha, to pursue those opportunities.
What was your experience, Rebecca?
I do agree. Anytime we have a posting that says hybrid on it, we're definitely getting people that are more likely to apply. So of course on hybrid. Another one that I noticed, and I first was a little surprised, it makes sense, vacation. Lots of questions about vacation, possibly a counter here and there on a vacation package. Just because for a year or two, vacation just didn't happen, and now in addition to that work-life balance on a hybrid, also having that ability to step away from work, enjoy yourself, and travel. So vacation was one that we've seen a couple questions, counters, etc.
What about you, Aaron, working for legal aids?
Well, we've had a lot of success, but also challenges with remote work. I mean, I think being a statewide organization, we had some really good things with the pandemic, with everyone working remotely, as far as connections between the different offices, where maybe before we would have just a phone call type of meeting, and when everyone adopted, because they were forced to, virtual meetings, things like that worked really well. We had, with 90 employees, we have probably 85 different opinions about remote work right now. And so it's, we are trying to kind of change and solidify some expectations there. And so that's always hard. But most of our positions that we're hiring for now they have a hybrid availability, but the people do need to work in the office, with an exception of a group that works completely remotely. So, and I think that's kind of an interesting group. So we have, what we title intake paralegals. And so they are taking phone calls and doing applications for clients to determine if we are able to serve them. And we were very lucky with the way that our technology was set up in 2020, that they were able to move to work completely remotely, because a lot of call center type positions weren't set up that way. And so those positions have stayed remote, but everyone else does have some expectation of being back in the office soon. And so that's been a challenge, but we're working through it.
What about you, Amber? What were they looking for to say, yeah, okay, job?
The remote status, as I mentioned before, that will seal the deal. We also obviously noticed an increase in compensation expectations during this time as the talent became more scarce. And so we had to work a lot with our compensation department to make adjustments to our pay ranges and such to try to get the talent that we needed. So if we could meet those compensation expectations along with offer remote status, we were golden. So.
Interesting. Okay, so we talked a lot about the applicants, but as the hiring frenzy was, occurring, what did you do to retain the employees that you already had? Were they making demands, or, How did that go? How did that work out?
Well, at Mutual, we're very focused on our culture. We have a culture program called Mutually Connected that everyone goes through as they come to our organization. And there's a lot of competencies that are taught that really resonate throughout all of our departments and our businesses. And so there was a focus on culture, and we took that even further. And we actually conducted a survey called the War for Talent survey. And we just went out and we asked our managers and our employees, you know, about their engagement with the organization, what they thought of our culture, what they thought of our pay structures, and we took all the feedback that we could get and put action plans in place to make sure that we could keep and retain our employees. And we just recently did a follow War for Talent survey, so kind of a round two to compare our progress. And learning and development opportunities have been a huge win for us, as well as some of the adjustments that were made, like I mentioned, in our compensation and the remote. Our folks are telling us loud and clear that that flexibility and that remote work is key.
You know, I think compensation has been a big driver. Any of you that are involved in compensation know that we're seeing sort of unprecedented raises. We used to look at market data when we set compensation, and I would say for the past couple of years, that's not been the driver. The driver has been, these are our good people and we want to keep them here. And so we've seen compensation raises, you know, to make that happen. I mentioned that I practice labor and employment law, and I also do union negotiations on the management side. And what I'm seeing is just sort of across the board in every industry that raises are higher than they've ever been in order to keep up with inflation and the cost of living increase. So I think that's sort of industry, not industry specific, but just something employers are seeing to not only retain the talent you have, but also to be able to recruit in any market. So in addition to compensation, just small changes to impact culture. One thing is just looking at sort of the day-to-day. What are small changes that we can make that impact someone's day-to-day that would make things better? That may not be something that sort of crosses the mind of the leadership that's making those decisions, but really seeking input from staff committees and associate committees that will tell us what matters to them. For example, we implement early outs on Fridays in the summer, so everybody loves that, attorneys included, that we get dismissed a few hours early in the summer. Another thing for associates is providing work from home capabilities, all the technology and full setup, including your direct dial phone, to enable sort of a more seamless way to interact with the office without actually having to be there all the time. So just really small day-to-day changes that impact culture. DEI initiatives focused on everything from mental health to engaging people in the community. We have a booth at the Omaha Freedom Festival this weekend where staff and attorneys come together to celebrate Juneteenth. So just really small changes that I think have had a big impact on our retention.
Erin.
Sure. So I think flexibility was incredibly important during the pandemic, and we've continued that as well. We know that is very important. Compensation is always going to be an issue for us. We have been working on it, and we've been able to provide pretty significant increases, but we're starting, we are trying to compete with other nonprofits and government agencies. We aren't going to be able to compete with private firms, essentially, and that is always going to be a challenge and always has been a challenge. And so it's just a little more challenging for us. But I agree. I think obviously small changes, small things. One of the things that we changed was like our wellness benefit, where it used to be that you could get a reimbursement for a gym membership. not a lot of people were going to the gym in 2020 and 2021. So we kind of expanded it to online apps or home gym equipment, things like that. We really try to provide as many training opportunities for our employees. We have like a monthly all staff where we either have one of our projects or programs present, or we bring someone in either from like our EAP or other community providers to provide information. And we really tried to give everyone the opportunity, especially for different online learning. We have a subscription to like LinkedIn Learning, so people can do online training whenever they want, and try to provide a fairly healthy training budget for people to take advantage of opportunities that are interesting to them.
I'll start on a topic that I don't think has been addressed too much. So every summer we do a survey to the firm, and one thing that we added was to the questions was well-being. I think they added 33 well-being questions to make sure that our staff and attorneys were being supported. Obviously, there's a lot of new stressors, so we wanted to make sure that what people were looking for, we would also be offering. In 2021, they started with that well-being monthly topic and resources and data on if you need additional help in this area. So I think last month with ergonomics, we've done like stress, depression, even workaholics, topics along those lines. And then trying to, especially with the remote work, there are still those people that miss that everyday conversation. So trying to get not only just knowing your team that you work with, but maybe you're the same working group that's in another office location. And then also trying to have along those lines infinity groups, so you can find other people that have the same goals that you have. And so, yeah, just trying to also focus on the wellness that I think we always had, but we never asked for the feedback on what exactly people are looking for. So I think that was one way to support and have a message from the office of the chair to every individual, and then open communication along those lines also.
So you mentioned that people miss that connection with their coworkers in the office. Are there things that your company does to kind of promote like team building, or what I call it mandatory fun, like where you have these, let's get together, we're gonna potato sack, that kind of stuff?
It depends on the office. Omaha's a little more difficult because it's our largest office and the setup of the office isn't as much, but I know a lot of organizations, like we have staff administrative week at the end of April, and I know our Atlanta office, one of their events that they did was a charity to support a charity, but then also with hybrid environments, you could possibly see the same same people that are on Tuesdays or whatever, but this was your opportunity to see everyone and working with teamwork. So it kind of depends on the office. They do try and have a little bit of mandatory plans that also maybe help another organization.
Anybody else have any? Amber?
We actually just had last week our first kind of all management meeting since the pandemic, and so we had about 600 managers that came into the auditorium, and we had a management meeting and some educational sessions and a happy hour after, and it was great to get to see people we hadn't seen except through Teams and in years. But everybody does something a little different depending on their department. But our law department recently had an all-day offsite where they then invited like a business leader from the different segments of our business to come and talk to the lawyers about the business and help them better kind of understand the daily operation. And so they spent a whole day kind of having fun and learning at the same time more about our business, which was a really great experience.
What kind of team building is your organization do?
You know, we have a variety of different events over the course of the year. We had
the last weekend, 2 weekends ago, the McGrath North Wellness Festival, which we host out at Zarinsky Lake. And it's, we invite in a variety of vendors with sort of a health focus. There's yoga classes and face painting, there's a run and all sorts of different health related activities, wellness related activities. And so attorneys and staff bring their family, extended families, lots of dogs and cute t-shirts, and get everybody together to kind of celebrate that. And we had a hiatus on that due to COVID, so we're happy to be back doing that. But those are the types of events we, partner with a local charity to do some kind of drive, school supplies, that sort of thing. So all different events that we try to do to promote community and organization. One thing we did this last month, somebody talked about Mental Health Awareness Month, which was last month in May. We did this a number of years ago with the lawyers, and this year we decided, why not? Why aren't we sort of including everybody? We called it Check In on a Buddy, and we basically bought a gift card to a local coffee shop for everybody, just a coffee shop in our building. And the intent of it was, May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and we provided a whole list of resources for people who may be themselves struggling with mental health issues or dealing with a family member or friend who needs some connection to resources. But the point of the gift card was, somebody that you might not have had the opportunity to check in on at the workplace, take them for coffee, check in, see how things are going. And it takes 5 or 10 minutes out of your day. We go downstairs, grab a cup of coffee. Nobody needs to buy it. We've bought it for you. So just connection points like that, I think, have been really helpful since returning from COVID and kind of getting back to normal and continuing to develop our culture.
Legal aid, what kind of things are you guys like to do?
Well, so in April, we had our first kind of in-person all staff meeting since since COVID, since 2019, really. And our focus in planning that was forced fun for everyone. In the past, those meetings would probably have some sort of a training. We did have a CLE, but policy announcements, things like that. And instead of doing that type of thing, we really, we had a DEI speaker come in and tried to have time for people just to connect with each other, especially we have new employees who hadn't met people from other offices, things like that. So sort of being more intentional in what we're doing when we actually come together versus what can be done online, Teams meetings, things like that.
Okay, so we heard a lot about our economy and how it's, going the wrong way fast. So as far as applicants, what type of applicants are you seeing? Are they mostly young or like early career individuals, experienced individuals, or second, third career applicants, or coming from totally different professions?
I think on the staff side, we've noticed a lot of change. We've noticed a lot of applicants who are looking to change professions, who don't have a lot of experience in legal. And I think that it's exciting for us, honestly, to draw on those talents and those perspectives from other industries, because I think it brings sort of a new, fresh outlook on what we do and how it can be improved, frankly. So on the staff side, we're seeing a lot of folks who are changing professions and looking for better benefits, pay, and working, different, more fast-paced work environment, or just a different, more stable work environment. On the attorney side, it's been really interesting because it's really all over the map. We've seen a lot of lateral movement. So attorneys that have been at an established practice for a number of years who are looking to change for a better culture or a bigger firm or a smaller firm. So we've seen a lot of sort of mid-level experienced lawyers looking to move firms. And we've also seen, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of younger lawyers who are looking for more mentorship, more opportunity, more sort of get to know you in person type culture that a law office can provide. And a lot of those applicants are coming from remote, work opportunities. Maybe they accepted that right out of law school and decided, you know, this isn't what I had in mind. I need something more hands-on. I need better supervision or client exposure. And so we're getting a lot of those applicants as well, which has been interesting and kind of fun to explore and get to know some of these folks who really haven't had, you know, the opportunity to step foot in their legal career because they've been sort of, you know, working remotely without getting to know maybe their boss very well or having much client exposure.
So, very similar. A lot of career changers. We saw a lot of teachers that wanted to step out of the school systems and get into corporate America, and we had opportunities for them to join us. But in addition to, I think the college grads are very prevalent, and they're coming in with very high expectations for compensation as they graduate, because they are, you know, coming out at a time when that they can do that. And so it's kind of changing the game a little bit. But our managers tend to look for people who have relevant experience. And so it's kind of a mismatch. We get a lot of those applications for those college grads, but our managers are really looking for at least 5 to 7 years experience. So we, you know, try to pipeline our candidates as much as we can and keep in contact with them for future opportunities. So
That's interesting because I see that a lot. It's not just in the legal field where they want you. How do they expect someone fresh out of college to already, you know, it's kind of a catch-22. You want me to have this experience, but you won't give me an opportunity. And you're going to train me the way you want things done anyway. So does it really matter that I'm fresh out of college?
yeah, well, we're really shifting our mindset with the upskilling and going ahead and taking advantage of some of this fresh talent. We just need to get some of our upskilling programs built. We do a workforce planning activity where we go out and talk with our managers about, you know, what are you going to need 2-3 years down the road, and they're having some trouble articulating, I think, what they need in the future so that we can get those programs built for them. So there's a little bit of a gap there right now, but I definitely see the tide turning in talent acquisition to a more skills-based hiring model.
So Rebecca, do you see that issue with the what are people asking for that may, I don't know, because what seems realistic to the person asking for it could seem absolutely ridiculous to the person listening to the demand. What's reasonable?
Like for the college grad.
Yeah. Well, I do think that oftentimes you have to look more at what the skills are for the position, and does it always have to have this degree, or does it always have to have this experience? And so you kind of have to think about it as a whole picture and evaluate, especially when you're reviewing your job descriptions. It's always said this, but is it a necessity for this position? Can we reevaluate it? We have new technology that has changed since we originally posted the position. And along the lines of the previous question, the pandemic, ours, it depends on what position we posted, but we have also seen the same where we posted a professional development position, and it was a lot. And granted, we posted it in January, February, when right around when teacher contracts would be adjusted. But it really was. I don't think 4 years ago, if we had posted that, we would have seen as many educators applying for it. And then also, again, on our staff, one of our hires last year was someone that worked with mental health as a counselor. And after so many years of the pandemic and, you know, so many clients, she did have a minor in criminal justice, but I don't think she ever thought she'd go to a legal secretary field. Did a complete change, just pure burnout on herself. And again, pre-pandemic, I don't know if we would have had that applicant. So, you know, things have changed, and you're not always getting the same applicants you would have years before, but it's also helpful to get new thoughts and ideas and a fresh perspective also.
Well, for our attorney positions, I would say our greatest area of success is newer attorneys. It's very difficult, especially we've talked about compensation. Someone coming from private practice to legal aid, it's a shock sometimes as far as compensation. And so it's tough and you don't want to be dishonest. And we try to be as upfront as possible as far as what our salaries are going to be. On the other hand, we are very lucky that we have a lot of people that either clerk or intern with us or have been involved with legal aid at some point in their school career. And so that's been a great pipeline for us that will probably continue. But that there have been some kind of career change applicants and candidates over the last year as well.
So we talked a lot about how the big change that kind of came out of COVID was hybrid working, the remote working. But what are some other policies or hiring practices that your company has done to either like retain current employees or to be competitive in recruiting other new employees?
So I think, I don't know if it was Erin who mentioned, we went round and round, as the pandemic, people were bringing employees back to work. You heard various, and still hear various types of sort of hybrid policies, 2 days in the office, 3 days in the office, 75, and you hear all sorts of different plans that companies had implemented post-pandemic and still maintain. And I think the challenge for our firm was we were hearing some of those plans and practices from other law firms. We were getting some of those demands from applicants. And so we really had to think long and hard about what do we want? Do we want to create a policy that mandates, when attorneys are in the office and how many days and who's going to police that policy, right? And so I think it was really challenging. We went round and round, but ultimately where we ended up was we think that hybrid work and remote working is here to stay. It's not something that is going to be policed strictly. And really, some of you bill hours like I do, and your work is measured by how satisfied your client is, right, with meeting their time demands. And so a lot of it polices itself. And so as long as people are getting the work done, we're able to maintain sort of a presence in the office that is a culture and makes people want to come to work and be part of a firm, that's where we landed. And so where that leaves us is we have kind of people that, attorneys that work different schedules. I know, myself personally, I work remotely when I need to, or when I need to get a huge chunk of work done, or if I have a meeting somewhere far away and I land at home, and that allows me to be most productive. That's where I am for the day. Some lawyers don't work it out at all remotely because that's just how they work best. So it's we kind of implemented a policy where we need your best work, and however you're going to do that, we trust you to do it. And so with associates, a little more challenging because of the training component. But again, we've been able to maintain kind of that hybrid environment with communication and just the technology that we implemented.
Okay. So very, very similar. Again, I'm repeating myself, the importance of the remote work opportunities for us has just been huge. But alongside of that, there's been initiatives around productivity in our organization as well, because of course, when you allow your workforce to work remotely and work flexibly, there is sometimes a trust issue. And so we implemented a program called Operational Excellence, where we're asking all our employees to engage in productivity initiatives, whether large or small, whether it's a way to save money for the organization or save time in doing a process. And so we're educating our staff on many operational excellence concepts, and we are pushing and holding people accountable to the productivity mindset and helping us improve our output.
Anybody else want to expand on that? I would say flexibility. I agree. We're pre-pandemic. We thought everything had to be on paper, printed off. Now with the electronic signatures, now with being used to working more in the team environment, knowing someone can back you up, and maybe you need to leave early because you have a soccer game or whatever it may be. I think that the pandemic has taught us that we can work more as teams and that there's opportunity for flexibility.
I think we are really trying to look at different situations and still, the best way to still have that flexibility that's very important, but also retain a positive culture. And one of the things that, for example, our administrative group is doing, we are moving to a place where we are all going to be in the office 1 day a week at the same time. I'm someone that greatly dislikes a hybrid meeting. I would rather have it either be all online or all in person. I just don't think you get the engagement when there are some people that are on the screen and some people, the interaction is so different. So if I'm planning a meeting, it's probably going to be one of the two, not a hybrid. But yes, it's tough to change the policy, and there are a lot of different factors that go into it, but finding a way to maintain that flexibility, I think, is incredibly important.
So Rebecca, were there what hard and soft skills that are most valuable to your company now versus the pre-pandemic? What has changed?
So I think that the biggest soft skill is something we've always had. So I don't know if it's changed, but flexibility, that ability to change. Like maybe previously you always did it one way because we were in the office. We always routed our expense reports to our accounting person, but now we're going to be doing it electronic because we're not in the office at the height of the pandemic. And then the hard skill is kind of a funny one, but the ability to do the Teams, the Zoom, know when you're on mute. No, here we are 3 years later, and this morning I was on a Zoom and someone's like, "You're on." It wasn't me, luckily, but another person on the team meeting. You're on mute. But honestly, how many times have we said you're on mute or clicked the wrong Zoom link? I have so many on my calendar, but yeah, I did use Zoom pre-pandemic. But only for interviews and usually for another, like the applicant was in another office. And now, even to this day, my calendar is full. I have a lot of, and granted, our team is located in different offices, but it's a funny answer, but it's so true. It's the ability to have your meetings on Zoom and like engagement as well.
What about you, Rebecca? Amber? I would agree with the computer literacy and as we have our call center folks working remotely, we're shipping them their equipment and crossing our fingers that they're going to be able to set up that setup themselves. And we're online with them on their first day, making sure. But some of our systems are kind of legacy homegrown systems, and they're scrolling through many different screens at one time to take care of our customers. And you have to be able to multitask. And it's the computer literacy is a real thing. So we started a series as an organization to try to help upskill people on Microsoft Teams, because there's so much more to Teams than just the chat and the video. And so we wanted to get everybody engaged in that tool and really understand everything about where, Office that it had to offer. So we did some upskilling there, but digital marketing, digital transformation, a lot of that is kind of new skills that we're looking at as well in our marketing departments and such. But everything is cloud engineers. It's all about technology, no matter what role you're in.
Awesome. So with the new technologies emerging all the time, like ChatGPT and other large language models and computer generative technologies, how does your company handle new technologies and incorporating them into how you do business? And does your company feel like they'll be left behind if they don't adopt certain things?
I think the reality is it's not going away, right? So we all have to find ways to adapt and deal with AI and all the other different technologies and be adaptive. But I think we also have a lot to manage and to think about as we implement these in our business and as we educate our clients on some of these technologies. I know for McGrath North as a firm, we are in the process of drafting a policy on the use of AI in our practice. I think we have lawyers that dabble in it and have experimented with it. You have all seen in the news some of those recent cases where lawyers rely on ChatGPT or the equivalent to write briefs, and have come back with huge sanctions against them for writing hogwash briefs, essentially citing nonsense as case law. So there are a ton. One being privacy, confidentiality, attorney-client privilege. If you've read any of the the data usage license agreements for any of these technologies, you'll know that once you enter it or once you input it, they own your data and your client's data if you've entered that. So we are crafting a policy around it. We're doing a lot to educate our clients on how to use it, how not to use it, how to create your own policies within your organization. We've got a seminar coming up in a couple of weeks on this exact topic. So it feels really urgent. And I think it is to not only sort of get a hold of it in our own organization and set some expectations, but also educate a broader client base on some of these things.
I don't know if the word being left behind is, I'm speaking more in general technology and not just the AI, but I don't know if it's so much being left behind. I agree with the topic of, I think the main conversation we've had right now is client data. But I think even if you look back in the days of when the PC first came out, everyone was like, oh, my job's going to be replaced or it's going to change in this way. And I think a lot of ways you have to think of technology as enhancing what you currently have. So especially with the AI, a lot of that is new, but it'll be interesting to see in the future how we can integrate it into our current work and if it can help us be more efficient and accurate in our work.
You already answered a question I was going to ask. Thank you very much. How does AI play in with legal aid?
I think it'll be interesting to see how it will. And I kind of step back from AI. I mean, I feel like I'm not the most technology savvy person, but I didn't know what ChatGPT was 2 months ago, and now it seems like it's everywhere, and things are happening and changing so quickly. But I do think, especially the pandemic again pushed a lot of this along. But there are so many, so much technology available. But you have to really determine what makes sense for your organization and for us, really, our clients. There are some things that are so valuable to reach rural clients that we didn't have 2 years ago. But if they don't have access, if they don't have internet access, if they don't have somewhere to be able to sign forms, to get things, to communicate, however, it doesn't matter. And so that's something that we really have to keep in mind. And so we try to put as much of new technology in place as we can, but you also have to remember that if people can't use it, it's not going to matter.
So I was thinking as we've been talking, about like the different trends before COVID and, post-COVID, like as far as say like when you were hiring or retaining employees, like the demands, like how much negotiation was going on before the pandemic, and then when folks saw that they had the upper hand over the employer, and now it seems like it's kind of shifting back, or is it shifting back? But I just want to know what your kind of experience is, on that, because like when how I've come, I'm a Gen Xer, so I've adapt whatever, water off a duck's back, and so to me it just seems a little. It would always seem a little weird. I mean, there's negotiate, but I say no. I'm the best candidate you'll ever have. You're gonna give me what I want, whether it seems ridiculous or whether I'm worth that or not. And if you don't like it, so what? I'll move on to the next one and make that demand. Whereas it seemed like more compromise would go on. Okay, yeah, well, we can talk about this. What do you experience? Does that make sense? As far as, yeah.
Yeah, I think things are shifting a little bit as far as, applicants definitely had the upper hand for a while, and it's starting to slowly shift back, but there's still a lot of negotiation going on, where obviously, the compensation packages are bigger than they were pre-COVID, and so, but I think the one thing about us is we are very focused on internal equity and making sure that we're not bringing in somebody, from the outside way over our people that have been there for, 10, 15, 20 years. And so we make those adjustments when we have to. And it's really part of our philosophy to make sure that, we're being equitable from a diversity, equity, and inclusion standpoint, and just, from a cultural standpoint.
I would say, I know we talked about compensation. I would see things that frankly I wasn't used to seeing when we hire new lawyers is they're looking for opportunities. They're looking for mentors. They're looking for growth opportunities, development opportunities. What's your DEI like? What's your so compensation, yes, but it's more about sort of the experience, the culture, the people, and what does 5 years look like for me? So those are questions that I think we've had to focus on more in the last 5 years than we ever have before, and it's created some exciting opportunities for us and made us focus on attorney development from a associate, newbie associate to making partner and then even beyond. So.
I would agree with the internal equity with compensation. That is something that is incredibly important to us and incredibly hard when you are trying to recruit new employees, but with the way the compensation challenges are right now, but we do keep that in mind. And so we probably lose out on some candidates because of it, but that is incredibly important to me, to recognize the staff that has been with the organization, that you can't just jump and not have that equity then. The other thing that I think has come up for us a lot in the last year is that, to me, maybe wasn't recognized or discussed as much in the past, was kind of, along with the flexibility of scheduling and things like that, is work styles, and recognizing that whether it's generational or just different types of people, that some people work differently, and it can be harder to manage or to supervise someone, but it doesn't mean that it's wrong, as long as expectations are being set and things are being, kind of addressed as they happen, that it's okay if someone maybe does something a little bit differently. It might not be exactly what a manager wants, but you have to really focus on, is the work getting done and how is it getting done? And is it, ultimately, are we serving our clients well? And so that's sort of a different take on flexibility than like scheduling, but I think it's important in retaining people and having a good positive culture too.
I agree with all the panelists so far. One of the things that we've been doing, an initiative we've had for probably about the last year, is the pay quality, listing our ranges beforehand on the position. Making sure to list which offices we're posting the position in. And then while we don't list our full benefits, we list all of our benefits that we offer. We don't go into full details, but so upfront, I think the candidate knows what we're offering. But just to reiterate some of the other questions, or one of the other answers is, you are seeing candidates more now asking, what is your firm doing? And how are you supporting? And what is your stance on this? And they're definitely, you have your website now. They're able to do research. They're able to ask you on this. And they already know so much about your company because they can do the research beforehand as well. So, but definitely trying to put it out there up front so that if we have a counter, it's not something that we've already put our stamp on that this is pay.
That's good. All right, we have a few minutes left. Are there any questions from the floor? Anyone? I'm curious, are there any smaller firms out here that have anything that could add, like, different than what you can do than the larger corporations can to retain or recruit?
Most interested in during the pandemic, since we've been talking about generations for most of this, and what generation are a majority of those people looking to get out of teaching? What generation are they coming from? Are they people who just started teaching and said, this pandemic thing is crazy, so I'm out? Or are they people, who have 20 years of experience and are just throwing up their hands and going to work in corporate America?
For us, so specifically like the professional development position where we had several teachers apply, I would say it would be individuals who were teaching for 7 years or less. So more, it wasn't quite what they thought it would be from when they were student teaching to now. So more new to the field.
I think we've seen a little bit of both. We saw some folks that had been in the industry for a while that just burned out and wanted to do something completely different. But we did have some of the early career teachers as well.
Anyone else have a question? Yes.
I guess maybe this is like broad, but if you each just had to say, like, what do you think you do best? Like, if it comes down to like, why are we the better choice for the applicant? What do you hang your hat on?
I would say for us, it's our culture. We have just an amazing culture at Mutual of Omaha. We recently did our employment value proposition and spoke to many employees across the board. And our new campaign is going to be at your best, where we believe that you can come to work, bring your whole self, and be at your best every day. And that may be at home, that may be in the office, that may be a hybrid mix. But our culture is going to support you through learning and growth and development opportunities. And, we're just there for our employees, and our engagement scores show it. So I believe our culture is the differentiator.
I think that answer definitely depends on the candidate, but I think that the full umbrella would definitely be that culture. You may have one person that wants the hybrid, but you have another person that wants to be in the office. But I think the thing that's going to touch every single person is definitely our culture. And one thing that we've always kind of talked about is the mutual respect. And I think you can get that in the office or virtual.
I think for us, it's the impact that you're going to have on our clients' lives. I mean, it's, and I want to be clear that I'm not serving our clients. My role is to serve our staff, and they are amazing, and they do unbelievable work with people who are, at the worst in distress, but the least just in very stressful situations and don't have anywhere else to turn. And that's, and so it's not an easy job, and no one has an easy job in this field, but it's so amazing and motivating for me to just see the work that our staff does.
I would say just to echo everybody, culture, I think, is a driving factor. I would also say it's the level of sophistication of the work that our firm does, and the adaptability. I think we value in our people the ability to adapt to changing client needs and the changing world around us. And so whether it's staff or attorneys, being adaptable is something that we value highly, and people that can kind of morph into whatever the firm is going to be, because we look to continue to grow and change and adapt to clients, so.
All right. Well, I want to thank each and every one of you for being on our panel today. I felt it was very, very informative. And thanks again.